Everything begins with the protagonist waking up next to a campfire, surrounded by women, and wondering if there was some celebration going on. Soon he discovers that it was a camping party and is amazed, mentioning that he could not miss such an opportunity. As he smells the aroma of roasted lamb, he begins to salivate, and upon noticing that it was an entire lamb, he is fascinated. Admiring the fire, the protagonist comments that the food was delicious and splendid, so he decides to approach, but ends up falling face first on the ground when he realizes he was tied up. Thoughtful, he wonders if those were ropes and tries to understand what was happening. Suddenly, a system window appears saying, Main mission, survive. Objective, survive the pursuit of the primitive people for 12 hours. Reward, Attribute Bridge X, Survival Pack X. Countdown, 1 minute and 20 seconds. Suddenly, 2 big cavemen approach him. Thoughtful and somewhat indignant, he realizes there were only men and wonders where the women from before were. The protagonist tries to talk to them, explaining that there was a misunderstanding and asking where they were. However, the 2 men start to laugh and prepare to grab him. Desperate, the protagonist finally remembers how he ended up in that place and comments that he really got himself into a big mess. 12 hours earlier, in an unknown location, the protagonist was crawling towards the sea. As he approaches, he scoops some water with his hands, washes his face, and comments that the previous day he was accompanying Sister Jang while she bought her favorite accessory, and wonders how he ended up there after just a nap. Thoughtful, he wonders if being in the company of a rich woman could be a punishment, although it was never a crime. However, he hears a noise, and upon spotting a group of strangely dressed people, wonders if they were doing cosplay. Then the protagonist asks how he could get out of there, but the youngest in the group speaks in an unknown language, and holding a spear, throws it towards the protagonist, almost hitting his face. Scared, he starts to run, and realizing that he was being chased, the protagonist screams that it was too real to be a reality show. Seeing that he was leaving the group behind, he taunts them to eat dust, as he used to be a runner, and normal people could not catch up with him, much less those who were carrying things. However, another spear passes close to hitting his abdomen, making the protagonist reflect and realize that they were really trying to kill him. Suddenly, a system window appears saying, Main mission activated, survive. Confused, the protagonist does not understand what that main mission means. He keeps running, when another system window appears saying, Main mission, survive the pursuit of the primitive people for 12 hours. Reward, Attribute Point X1, Survival Pack X1. Countdown, 11 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds. The protagonist wonders if that was a system and if he had transmigrated. However, one of the men aims his spear and throws it in his direction. Desperate, the protagonist tries to dodge, but the spear hits him directly in the neck, making him slowly lose consciousness while lamenting. In the present, the protagonist was tied up while a system window appears saying that he had survived the 12-hour pursuit of the primitive people. Main mission completed. Survive. He acquired the survival pack and attribute point +1. Please distribute your attribute point. The protagonist feels relief upon realizing that he survived. Observing the system window, he wonders what the mission reward would be. He had acquired a survival pack and 1 more attribute point, which now needed to be distributed. In another system window, it appears saying, User, Chen Li, Physique +1, Strength +1, Speed +1, Prestige 0, Technology 0, Terrain none. The protagonist thinks that the pluses must mean that they can be enhanced, and it seemed to be a system seen in games. He wonders if he has transmigrated into some kind of world that simulates a game. The system asks if he would like to open the survival pack. Chen replies that he would like to open it. The system congratulates him, alerting that he has acquired expertise in all languages, novice rank. The system congratulates him, alerting that he has acquired the survival booklet, novice rank. The system alerts him that the map is active. All the places he visited will be pinned. He can name them freely. The system asks if he would like to take out the mountain-splitting axe. Reminder, all items removed from storage space cannot be put back. Jungle survival registered. Basic medicine registered. Suddenly, the protagonist begins to understand what the natives were saying around the campfire. A man wearing a skull on his head boasts of being the bravest and fiercest, capable of defeating the most powerful of beasts. A woman sitting near him is fascinated and comments that she would like to have a child with him. Chen thinks he is in a primitive world where civilization is yet to develop, and everything is in its initial stage. He assumes he was sent to a game where he needs to survive while helping to develop civilization. In short, it is a strategy and survival game. Thoughtful, he wonders if he might be something like a president or a god in this context. Reflecting on his situation, The protagonist decides to assign the attribute point to strength and decides to summon the mountain-splitting axe. Suddenly, the axe materializes in his hand, and strengthened by the point distributed in strength, he uses his new power to break the ropes that held him. He is surprised to find that just one point was enough to make him so strong. Suddenly, the cavemen notice that Chen has escaped and run towards him. The leader orders that they capture him without letting him escape and shouts to kill and eat him immediately. As they approach, he says the boy would not be able to escape. With a slight smile, the protagonist points his axe at them, calling them idiots. Speaking their language, he confronts them, questioning how they dare to disrespect a deity. The leader looks confused and asks what a deity is, as they did not know. The protagonist, realizing that only he spoke and deducing that he must be the leader of the group, Chen replies that he was sent from the heavens and that he is there to dominate them. He warns them that they should prepare to be punished for the affront. The leader becomes enraged and with a leap, lunges at him with his stick, and a system window appears saying, "The mission has been activated, he should hold firm. Objective: dissuade the primitive people, dominate them, and become the leader. Reward: attribute point X1, hemostatic solution X3. Penalty for failing: loss of the mountain-splitting axe." The protagonist realizes he cannot fail, as losing the axe would mean his end in this era. He then attacks the leader, confronting his axe with the adversary's stick, and the force of the impact causes the ground beneath them to crack. Chen reflects that he never imagined that the primitive people would possess so much strength. Both employ all their strength in the fight, but the protagonist's axe begins to crack the leader's stick. He realizes that the enhancement has strengthened his body. After demonstrating a great amount of strength, the two begin to shout, but the protagonist cuts the stick of his opponent, throwing a piece away. He looks back, where the other part of the stick was, while the leader does not believe his weapon was broken. Everyone there is amazed, looking at the piece of the weapon that broke. Chen looks forward seriously, with a bad feeling. Soon after, the leader, taken by fury, begins to shout, questioning how he dared to break his weapon, and orders everyone to advance, as they would attack together and should reduce him to pieces. The protagonist begins to run and warns the leader not to be a poor loser, since everyone had agreed to a one-on-one duel. He also mentions that many there seem to want to intimidate a 24-year-old, and questions if they consider that fair. However, one of the cavemen catches up to him and attacks from behind, but Chen manages to react in time, breaking the wooden stick with his axe, leaving his opponent trembling on the ground. The protagonist, facing them, curses and declares that it would end there. Pointing his axe, he warns them not to be hasty, as he would kill them before dying himself, and yells for them to back off. The cavemen hesitate for a moment. Chen realizes he is in trouble, as if they attacked all at once, he wouldn't be able to resist. He needed to think of a way to intimidate them. However, the group chasing him starts to tremble with fear and desperately flees. The protagonist, confused, wonders why they suddenly began to run away. While he reflects on whether he scared them, he questions if it was because he raised his voice a bit or because he is truly frightening. A huge wild beast approaches behind him unnoticed, but suddenly a system window appears informing, "A side mission activated, scare off the saber-toothed tiger. Objective: help the primitive people to scare away the fierce saber-toothed tiger. Reward: attribute points X2, primitive people's prestige. Mission started, acceptance is automatic, it cannot be rejected." The protagonist is confused to see the side mission involving the saber-toothed tiger in the system window and wonders what that is. Unbeknownst to him, the tiger begins to salivate over him, but he only notices when drops start to fall on his head. Looking up, he surprises the tiger, who is not expecting his reaction. However, quickly, Chen begins to run upon realizing that it was indeed a huge, real saber-toothed tiger. The tiger begins to chase him, and with its sharp claws, it tears everything in its path as the protagonist tries to flee into the jungle. Desperate, Chen thinks it's very unfair and wonders why everyone wants to devour him. The tiger leaps trying to capture him, but the protagonist manages to save himself by jumping over a ravine, and soon thinks that if it continues like this, he will end up being killed. Realizing that the tiger is still chasing him, Chen wonders what kind of side mission this was and how he could scare off the tiger, since a single bite could tear off half of his body. Suddenly, with a great leap, the tiger manages to scratch the protagonist's back, who falls to the ground. Quickly getting up, he thinks that really hurt, and that if he took another attack like that, he would die. He questions why he has so much bad luck, and realizes that he can no longer run away from the tiger. Evaluating the situation, he concludes that a frontal attack wouldn't work. He needs a plan. As he looks around, he wonders what he could use to deal with the saber-toothed tiger. Spotting a fire in the jungle, He realizes that beasts are afraid of fire. With the tiger approaching, Chen realizes he has only one chance. He charges towards the beast, shouting that he will face it from there on. With a roar, the tiger also charges. The protagonist, almost being hit, starts to slide to pass under the beast and comments that it wouldn't be able to hit him as he slid at the right time. However, his plan fails and the tiger stumbles over him. Desperate, the protagonist runs off and thinks he will never again believe what he sees in movies, while the tiger, even more enraged, chases after him. As he flees, Chen realizes that this is part of the behavior of felines who love to play with their prey. In the jungle, he thinks that the vegetation will help him buy time and that victory will be his as soon as he reaches the fire. With its sharp claws, the tiger tries to hit the protagonist again, but he manages to dodge the beast's attacks and quickly spots the fire. As the tiger destroys all obstacles with powerful attacks, the protagonist jumps and rolls, reaching close to the fire. He quickly grabs one of the burning logs and hits the tiger's eye, which growls but does not back down. The protagonist realizes he was right. The fire put the tiger on alert. Facing the beast, he challenges it and asks if it wasn't fun chasing him, hoping that this would make it back off. However, Chen hears a terrifying sound and wonders if it could be from a monster even bigger than the saber-toothed tiger. After hearing the noise, all the birds around fly away in fear, and the tiger, hearing the sound and becoming terrified, flees. The protagonist is confused to see the tiger running away and yells at it not to flee and wonders how the mission would turn out if it fled, but a system window appears saying that the side mission was accepted, scare off the saber-toothed tiger. The system congratulates him saying that the saber-toothed tiger fled and he completed the mission, scare off the saber-toothed tiger. He earned attribute points X2 and the prestige of the primitive people. He should distribute the points. Realizing that a huge beast was approaching, he comments that he needed to flee from there, as his survival was a priority. While fleeing, he decides to add 1 point to strength and another to agility. Determined, he starts to run, and notices that thanks to the point added in agility, he could move easily among the jungle obstacles. Suddenly, the protagonist discovers the primitive people hiding, and upon seeing him, the leader is surprised and questions why he wasn't devoured by the saber-toothed tiger. With a slight smile, Chen lifts his axe and comments that for him, a saber-toothed tiger is nothing more than a kitten, and that the animal fled desperately after being easily defeated by him. The protagonist believes that now he will be worshipped by them, but realizes that they are not impressed by his action and wonders if they did not understand what happened. Suddenly, a blonde woman approaches him slowly, causing confusion. When she gets close, he questions her about what she was doing. She clings to his leg and exclaims that he saved them. Then, the other people start to affirm that he saved them, asking him to accept their gratitude and to assume the leadership of the people, so that they would no longer be afraid of the saber-toothed tiger. He ponders and wonders if this was the prestige of the primitive people given as a reward by the system. Surprised by the great impact of his actions, he asks them to stand up, commenting that it is difficult to refuse the request given so much excitement. Excited, they begin to proclaim that besides staying with them, he would also be their leader. Another mentions Chen's strength, saying he was so moved that he almost cried. Chen then imagines himself as a king. He orders them to rise, as from now on, he would be the king of that people. A system window appears saying that he was successful in integrating with the unnamed tribe. Mission completed, hold firm. Obtained hemostatic solution 3 times, attribute point 1 time. He had to distribute his points. The protagonist decides to apply it to physique, thinking that any improvement in attributes would strengthen him, and apparently, he would need to carry out missions to acquire more attributes, so he decides to open his inventory. A system window then appears that says, Hemostatic Solution, a solution created by combining various medicines, aids in bleeding and promotes muscle growth with a validity of 1 day. Chen is disappointed to realize that the product has an expiration date, and worse, lasts only 1 day, and if he took it out, he would have only 1 day to use it. After picking an item from his inventory, he decides to use one to test the effect on the wounds on his back. Upon applying the product to the injuries, they heal instantly, leaving the tribe amazed. The protagonist mentions that it was quite useful and could save his life in risky situations, and asks Annabelle if anyone else was injured to offer the cure. Annabelle exclaims that the king was incredibly strong, and the people thank Chen, who questions if he wouldn't be able to protect them if he weren't strong enough. He states that as a king, he needed to know them better. Pointing to Annabelle, he asks for his name and his abilities. He responds that his name was Shirgu, the former leader before his arrival, known as the best fighter. Another introduces himself as Gun, standing out as an excellent hunter. A warrior named Lang Gu Chui introduces himself next, saying he had a voice so powerful that he could scare off wild animals. A muscular individual introduces himself as Huang Shi, the one with the greatest physical strength in the group. Suddenly, a hand lands on the muscular man's shoulder, asking if he had finished his introduction. Then, a woman interrupts, saying it was her turn to introduce herself. She begins by praising the king, calling him honorable and kind, and identifies herself as Shan Ling Ju Da, suggesting they call her Da Da. She was skilled in throwing rocks due to her excellent aim. The protagonist is impressed by her build and comments that she seemed more like a secret boss from some game. Next, a woman holding a fruit introduces herself as Shou Shou, saying she is an expert at climbing trees to pick fruits. Chen, relieved to meet someone he considered normal, expresses that it was a pleasure to meet her. However, he is suddenly hit by something. The protagonist wonders who would have hit him with a water bag. A tall woman apologizes, introducing herself as Ah Yu and commenting that the king was amazing. She also introduces her two children, mentioning that she has not yet named them. Chen is delighted to see that there were children there and recognizes the potential of these people. Suddenly, the young man who nearly hit him with an arrow earlier yells, calling him, startling the protagonist. The young man identifies himself as Zhun Lija, and although he has nothing special, mentions that he has sharp ears and offers help in escorting. The protagonist thinks it over and comments that someone distinctive finally appeared, referring to Zhun Lija as an excellent scout who would be of great use. He then decides to introduce himself, stating his name and suggesting they could call him King, Boss, or Brother Chen. He explains that he is a civilized person who arrived there to transmit knowledge to them. The tribe's people show confusion about what terms like Brother Chen, civilization, or transmit knowledge mean. The protagonist then assures them that what he will teach will make them progress significantly, promising that if they stay with him, he will ensure they eat meat every day. Excited by the prospect of eating meat daily, the tribe members start to celebrate. Suddenly, a system window appears saying that Ding was assimilated the host's desire. Main mission activated home. Mission content: help in the construction of the home of the primitive people, form and establish a true tribe, and expand the number of people to 50. Mission duration: 15 days. Since the mission was activated early, an additional 3 days were granted, changing the duration to 18 days. Mission reward: attribute points times 3, large resource box times 1, rigid inheritance times 1. The protagonist realizes this is a main mission, and observing the people notes that, along with the children, there were only 15 people at the location. If he wants to expand the tribe to 50 members in 18 days, he would have to assimilate other tribes. He would need to do everything in his power to complete the mission within this period. Analyzing the new rewards, such as the large resource box and rigid inheritance, he hopes these rewards will be valuable. Later that night, while everyone was sleeping, the rumbling of the protagonist's stomach woke him up. He mentioned that hunger prevented his sleep, and observing a woman licking a bone, concluded that there was nothing available for him to eat. Additionally, he noted the bravery of the tribe members, as there were no guards while they slept. Chen, desperate to need to eat something soon, suddenly remembered the meat left near the fire after the encounter with the tiger. However, two figures emerged in his subconscious, one in the form of an angel, warning that the monster that had scared away the saber-toothed tiger might still be nearby, and another in the form of a devil, insisting that he could not remain idle and die of hunger, suggesting that he should take a risk and fight if necessary. Chen gives himself light pats on the face and comments that it was a waste of time to worry, as he did not believe he would encounter the monster. Summoning his axe, he heads towards the piece of meat. Walking under the moonlight, he finally arrives at the location. Hidden behind the bushes, he notices the silence and remembers that he still needed to be cautious. However, as he approaches the fire, he realizes that there were more spoils from someone else, and as a king now, he could not just think about himself. After collecting the spoils, he decides to return and share them with the tribe's people. As he was heading back, he felt that the atmosphere of the place had changed, and suddenly, he falls into a hole, wondering how it appeared there. Confused, he observes his shadow cast in the hole and questions how the moonlight could penetrate such a dense forest. However, he realizes that it was not just a hole, and observing the destruction around, he wonders what kind of creature could leave such a large footprint. Comparing it with that of the saber-toothed tiger, he concludes that this one is much larger. He speculates about what monster would have such footprints and reflects that, having encountered the saber-toothed tiger, he should have realized that this place was not just a barbaric era, but a time when the most fearsome and lethal creatures in history inhabited. Walking back to his people, he thinks he cannot waste time and needs to find a safe place as soon as possible. Later, after sunrise, while the tribe's people were fighting over the piece of meat, the protagonist, shocked by this behavior, shouts for them to stop stealing from each other. Chen reflects that the wretches don't even know how to make fire, are unaware of concepts of economy and modesty, and have much to learn. The protagonist declares that today's food will be reserved for the hunters who will go out, and asks who will accompany him. Annabelle explains that they normally hunt in turns. Yesterday were Agun, Huang Shi, and he. Today it would be Lu Teng, He Ju Jiao, and Long Guqi's turn. Impressed, he suggests that if the king goes, everyone else would also go, and everyone gets excited about the idea. Quickly, the protagonist notices that Xun Li is disheartened and remembers that it was him who captured him yesterday, possibly fearing retaliation. He thinks about how to motivate him. Chen then says that those who want to accompany him can do so, as he wishes to find a safe place to establish the new home. Da, curious, asks what this home would be. He explains that home is the place where you build and live with your people, like the roots of trees. A home offers safety both for current and future family members. Dada understands this, and enchanted with the king, hugs him tightly and asks if she could stay by his side. The protagonist explains that they will all be part of a big family in the future, so they will all stay together. She, excited, begins to shout saying that the king wanted to stay with her and was willing to have a child with her. Chen, confused, asks her to stop talking nonsense. Annabelle asks where they will build the home. The protagonist asks everyone to come closer and pay much attention. Drawing on the ground, he explains that they need to find an open land with mountains to the north and a river to the south. That way, they would have access to drinking water, irrigation, firewood, and rocky materials, as well as establishing a relatively safe zone, reducing the risks of attacks. This would facilitate both hunting and harvesting. According to him, they would find seeds and wood easily, using the materials for agriculture and building houses. Thoughtful, he wonders if it would be better to be near the sea, leaving the tribe's people confused without understanding the explanation. The delta could offer fertile soil and a favorable environment for learning maritime navigation in the future. Xun Li interrupts him and mentions that he knows the place the king is looking for. Chen, surprised, asks if he is telling the truth and asks Xun Li to take him there, because if such a place really exists, it would be of great help to them. Xun Li explains that this place is to the east and not very far from there, but advises that the king should not go there because there is a herd of strong-tempered cows. The protagonist, imagining the cows as those of the future, asks if they were afraid of mere cows and comments that if they had cows, they could obtain nutritious meat, as well as other domestic products and animal traction. Decided, he states that the herd of cows would be their prey that day. Then, he shouts for everyone to grab their weapons, as they would head east to create the new home. Walking eastward, they notice that the environment is normal. Hidden behind the bushes with a chicken hat, Xun Li comments that the area is safe and that they could soon advance. Chen says they don't need to be so cautious, as they cannot afford to waste time since it would soon be nightfall. He reminds everyone that there's no reason to worry, as he had scared off the saber-tooth tiger, and, should the tiger return, he would protect them. Xun Li agrees with the king and informs that they would see the area of the cow herd upon reaching the top of the mountain. Walking up to the top, Chen, confidently, asks Xun Li to guide them there. Peering out, Xun Li asks everyone to crouch down because the herd was there. The protagonist questions the excessive caution and, looking for himself, asks if there are other monsters besides the cows. However, he is enchanted by the place and wonders if the odor is from the sea, asking the system to open the map. Upon examining the location, he realizes that they are indeed near the sea and that it would be an excellent place to build the first home. However, Xun Li pulls him, making the system window disappear, and the protagonist is confused, trying to understand what was happening. Xun Li asks the king to stay quiet to not alert the herd of cows. Observing the herd, Chen comments that he would be careful. A system window appears saying, Survival Manual, Active Search, Scanning Result, Plants X3, Animals X2, Green sunflower herb can be used to relieve stomach pain. Dragon vine, its sap has a mild toxin that can cause numbness and paralysis. Great Tsubaki, a deciduous tree, produces high-quality wood for hundreds of years. Gray squirrel, a mammal that feeds on nuts, has delicious meat. Pincer wasps, their sting contains a neurotoxin. More than 5 stings can be fatal. The protagonist was confused because he couldn't locate the herd, so he asked where they were. Shun-Li explained that they were in that small forest near the river bend and offered to take them there to check. Chen agrees and decides to check the herd personally. Half an hour later, the group rushes toward the small forest, and upon arriving and hiding among the bushes, Shun-Li warns that they could not get too close, or they would be noticed. The protagonist notices that the environment is very quiet and wonders why Shun-Li was so cautious, since it was just a herd of cows and they did not pose a great danger. Observing around, he notices other things, and a system window appears saying, Updated plants X3, small animal X1, updated map. The protagonist is frustrated and wonders if that was all. Hidden among the bushes, he mentions fearing the presence of terrifying monsters in the area, but finds it strange not to see even a small calf, questioning if the hunters might have been mistaken. Chen questions if Shun-Li could have mistaken the place, but Shun-Li begins to tremble and points to something. Quickly, the protagonist notices something strange, seeing a huge shadow and wondering why a large tree would be moving. In panic, Shun-Li screams for them to look up. Upon doing so, the protagonist despairs, trying to understand what that huge creature was, unable to believe that such a huge beast could be a cow, and a system window appears saying, Black iron-horned cow, mammal, order Artiodactyla, subfamily Bovini, mostly herbivorous and extremely territorial. He wonders if this really was a cow. Annabelle, with a trembling voice, questions the king about whether they were really going to hunt that. The protagonist, terrified, confirms that yes, they would hunt them, and with a serious look, advises preparing an ambush while he goes to check the situation alone. After his departure, the other hunters comment that the king was awesome. Chen, distressed by the situation, thinks he does not want the tribe's people to die, and observing the black cows, concludes that he only has to trust in his speed ability. He thinks her arm was thicker than his own body and decides it would be better to first test with a calf. While looking for another, he is startled by the terrifying sound a cow makes and opts to continue searching. Upon finding one that is eating, he hesitates upon noticing its size and considers it would be unfair to interrupt someone in the middle of a meal. Finally, he finds a smaller cow playing with a butterfly and decides to approach calmly, thinking it would be safer if it had a gentle temperament. As he emerges from the bush, he tries a gentle approach and asks if the grass was tasty, noting that it was still eating. However, the smaller cow quickly becomes serious, and Chen, awkwardly, thinks she would not suddenly attack him. Suddenly, she starts to bellow, attracting the attention of the entire herd. Enraged, the other cows advance towards him. The protagonist protests, saying he only asked a question and that they didn't need to go crazy. Desperate, he begins to run and decides to enter the water, believing it would make them stop chasing him. Looking back, he notices that not even the water discouraged them and comments that he did nothing wrong. The tribe's hunters, watching the situation, are impressed by the king's audacity, commenting that only he would have the courage to provoke the entire herd. One of the hunters notes that he is approaching a cliff and a dead end, while another questions what he means, as the king must be planning to take down all the cows at once. While fleeing, the protagonist screams for help, and with extreme agility, begins to jump and climb the cliff. However, the cliff begins to tremble, and he looks down, questioning what was happening. Looking down, he realizes that the cows were colliding against the cliff, and seeing one of them unconscious, wonders if they couldn't stop in time and ended up crashing into the rock wall. At the top of the cliff, he began to yell to get their attention, commenting that it would be great if they were all eliminated, but a group of cows stopped near the cliff, staring at him intently. The protagonist realized that they wouldn't be able to climb such a steep wall, and commented that they wouldn't be able to reach him. Noticing that they were retreating, he understood that he was safe there. Watching the situation, he tells them to wait for him. As soon as he teaches his tribe to hunt and make weapons, he would teach them a lesson. Later, he realizes he wouldn't be able to descend now since the mad cows were waiting for him below, and the only option was to climb, keep climbing, and memorize the location. Reaching the top of the cliff, something catches his attention, and as he contemplates the landscape, he is amazed, realizing that this was the perfect place. He decides then to found not just a village, but an empire. This was just the beginning of his journey. Later, the tribe's members wonder about the actions of the cows and question if anyone saw where the king went. At the top of the tree, Shun-Li looks for the protagonist, while Annabelle expresses hope that he hadn't been crushed or split in half. Coming down from the tree, Annabelle mentions that he will look for the powerful axe to retrieve it. As soon as he touches the ground, something is launched in his direction. A powerful axe nearly hits him, leaving him terrified as a shadow approaches and comments that he talks too much. The protagonist then confronts him, asking if he didn't think he would return intact. Annabelle is surprised by the king's presence. Shun-Li is relieved, and Annabelle, sheepishly, asks if he is okay and if the herd was really fierce. Pointing to a cow, the protagonist mentions that he thought of eating more meat to strengthen his forces and asks if they would accompany him. Shun-Li, worried, responds that he doesn't know how to fight, while Annabelle, smiling, comments that they could still bite them, although that wouldn't help much in defeating them, and asks the king to show the way. With an intimidating look, the protagonist questions them if it wasn't clear, demanding a simple yes or no answer, to which all the hunters shout yes. Retrieving his axe that was stuck in a tree, he points out and comments that he will teach them how to create powerful weapons worthy of them, an effective method for a successful hunt, with which they will defeat those black cows in 3 days. Later, above the forest, the protagonist used his powerful axe to cut down trees, while the tribe's people admired the king's power. Annabelle asks the king that it wasn't possible to eat that large tree, noting that it also had no fruit, and asks what he was planning. With the axe on the tree trunk, the protagonist explains that this was material to create weapons and asks everyone to watch and learn from the process, as it will be useful in the future. Holding a piece of wood, he instructs them to make a wooden pole about 2 meters long. Using his axe, he starts to sharpen the tip and asks them to do the same. After finishing the spear, a system window appears saying, "Successful creation of a new weapon. Technology points +1. Current attributes, Physique 2, Strength 3, Speed 2, Prestige 0, Technology 1, Territory none." Holding the spear, the protagonist comments that it was much better than the attribute points received as a reward for completing the missions. The only problem was that he didn't know what the technology points were for. About to throw the spear, he explains that this is a pointed weapon that should be used to stab or throw, and then throws the spear towards a tree, hitting it squarely. One of the hunters praises the throw as excellent, and another is impressed. Annabelle, enchanted as he approaches the spear, comments that the piece of wood was really powerful. The tribe's people, also enchanted, ask him to teach them how to create a weapon like that. Annabelle hugs him and comments that before he just collected these pieces of wood, but didn't know he could create something on his own. The protagonist asks everyone to calm down, as he was there to help them. Then he decides to give the spear as a gift to Annabelle, who thanks him for the generosity in receiving it. Chen then shouts for them to create their own spears, as they would begin special training. Shun-Li promptly responds to his wish. Later, in the middle of the forest, Annabelle and Hwan participate in a training combat with the new spears. Ah-gun observes that the wood was wide, thick, and hard, while the protagonist explains to the other hunters that the two would face him. Initially, they hesitate, but soon Lang-gu and another hunter attack the protagonist. Lang-gu tries to hit the protagonist with a powerful blow, but Chen easily dodges and notes that the attack caused great damage to the ground. The second hunter tries to hit him next, but the protagonist counterattacks, striking him directly on the chin. Lang-gu, with a jump, attacks again, but the protagonist points his spear and yells at him to die, leaving everyone stunned by the outcome of the duel. The protagonist then touches Lang-gu with the spear, declaring that he was dead. Lang-gu is surprised by the king's power. Chen reminds him that he used to be one of his enemies. Falling to the ground trembling, Lang-gu admits that the king is a god and obviously knew how to fight. Holding the spear, the protagonist explains that they didn't know how to use wooden weapons, only relied on their brute strength to attack. The advantage of this weapon was in its tip, which should always be directed at the enemy or prey. He concludes by saying that they needed to practice more, so that the spear became more compatible with their abilities. After drawing a circle on a rock, the protagonist asks the hunters if they are seeing it. He then asks everyone to keep a distance and try to hit the circle right in the middle, promising that the first person to succeed will receive another wooden spear. Annabelle, excited, declares he will be the first and prepares to throw the spear. With great strength, he throws it, and although it pierces the stone, it misses the target. The protagonist praises the throw, but observes that he just needs to improve his aim and announces that the next one will be Shun-Li. Suddenly, a spear almost hits him. Chen comments that it was a close call that almost crippled him, and Shun-Li, embarrassed, apologizes. The protagonist then begins calling the next ones as they continue to miss the target. Watching the hunters, he thinks that apparently they have no talent for this and that he will need to teach them step by step. However, a spear hits the target squarely, shocking the protagonist and all the other hunters. Chen is surprised that they hit exactly in the center, while Ah-gun shouts asking if this made him the winner. The protagonist congratulates Ah-gun, hands him a new spear, and encourages him to keep it up. Dada, who was up in a tree, notices something and yells warning that there was trouble. because a wild animal was approaching through the forest. Quickly, the protagonist shouts for them to grab their spears and prepare for combat. As he realizes the animal is approaching, Chen yells for them to stay alert and thinks of using this opportunity for them to gain experience. A huge beast emerges, destroying the trees in its path, and begins to roar. The protagonist yells for them to pay attention, and when the beast charges at them, he yells to keep focus and prepare for the fight. Wielding his spear, he yells confidently that they would win. The beast, growling towards the protagonist, tries to hit him, but he dodges and yells for them to surround the beast without attacking. Pointing his spear, he instructs them to wait for the signal. However, the beast charges at him. With a swift movement, the protagonist pierces the beast with a powerful blow between the eyes and yells to weaken the enemy. Realizing that his attack was not enough to defeat the beast, he yells to start the attack. He then orders Agun and Langu to throw their spears at the beast's vital points, and both promptly comply, hitting the target accurately. The beast becomes even more enraged, and with a powerful attack, breaks the protagonist's spear, leaving him surprised. It remains standing while the hunters surround it, but with a precise throw, Agun hits the beast's eye with his spear, causing it to scream in pain. The protagonist, seeing this throw, thinks that Agun continues to surprise him. The beast then begins to lose control, and Chen yells for Shirgu and the other hunters to attack. Together, they throw their spears, hitting the beast, which growls fiercely. Trying to escape, the beast moves, but the protagonist intercepts its path and comments that it wouldn't be so easy to run away. At that moment, he summons his powerful axe and with an accurate strike, cuts off the beast's leg. He yells for Shun Li, who is in the tree, to quickly jump on the beast, hitting hard, but the beast does not die and begins to emit a sinister aura. At that moment, a system window appears, announcing a new situation. Danger. The beast has gone mad. The protagonist yells that the beast was out of control and that they should back off. Meanwhile, Shun Li, with his spear embedded in the beast's body, questions why it won't die. However, the protagonist advances on it, leaving the other hunters worried, who scream for him to be careful. With an impressive leap, he attacks the beast with his axe, causing a large explosion. The other hunters, uncertain of the outcome, are concerned for the king and start calling him. When the smoke clears, one of the hunters yells for them to look on top of the giant beast's head, startling another hunter who asks him to stop shouting, fearing it might be the ghost of the king. Atop the dead beast's head, the protagonist affirms that he is alive and well, and with a slight smile comments that their cooperation resulted in the defeat of the beast. He then announces that that night they would feast on a delicious wild boar. The hunters are excited, but Shun Li still holds his spear even with the wild boar down, relieved that they have food for today. The protagonist extends his hand and asks him to get up, praising him for his excellent work. Speechless and moved, Shun Li thanks the king. Regarding the wild boar, the protagonist calls Agun, who promptly responds, asking what the king wishes. Chen mentions that it was Agun who dealt the main blow, and announces that from today, Agun will accompany him on future hunts, and that he will create new weapons for him. Agun begins to celebrate among the other hunters, initially causing some discomfort. However, the other hunters begin to celebrate and shout cheers for the king, with one of them commenting that he was sent from the heavens. Another hunter highlights that the protagonist split the wild boar's head with just one blow of his axe. Annabelle comments that the king killed the beast with ease without needing his help, and seeing Dada carrying a large piece of meat, asks where she was taking it, as he wanted a piece. She responds that she would not give it away, as she had cut it especially for the king. Approaching the protagonist, Dada mentions that the large piece of meat was for him. Chen is surprised and asks if they usually eat the meat that way, to which she confirms yes, and asks what the problem would be. The protagonist begins to remember that they knew how to make fire, and questions why they continued eating raw meat. She explains that the fire was made by accident, leaving the protagonist thoughtful about whether the fire had been just an accident. He reflects on how human civilization developed through fire, an element that transmits security and scares away wild creatures. Even a developed nation cannot remain independent without fire, and they were more backward than he imagined. If they knew how to use fire, they would understand that roasted meat is better and tastier than raw meat. The protagonist thinks that if he wants to help this primitive people, he first needs to teach them to produce fire. He calls them and mentions that he had an idea. Analyzing the tip of his old spear, he realizes it could work. Rubbing the spear tip on the trunk of a fallen tree, he comments that he will have to teach other hunting techniques on another day and summons the tribe to come closer and pay close attention. He explains that using a wooden stick, down or something similar, and a tree trunk, and with his hands, he begins to rub the stick patiently. As the stick pierces the trunk, a small flame of fire forms, leading the tribe's people to celebrate, saying that the king was a great god. The protagonist comments that this was so they would stop eating raw meat, and the tribe's people begin to call him the god of fire. Annabelle, excited, shouts wanting the whole world to know that his king was incredible. The protagonist grabs his head and comments that this was barbaric, and that he had already told him to stop making a fuss. As he watches the people making sure the fire does not go out, a system window appears saying, "New inventions, using wood to produce fire. Technology points +10. Current attributes, physique 2, strength 3, speed 2, prestige 0, technology 11, territory none." The protagonist is surprised to have received a reward of 10 points and comments that earning technology points was easier than he thought, but he still did not understand what technology points were for. Another system window appears saying, "Technology points are used to identify rigid inheritances. 10 technology points are needed for each identification." Suddenly, he remembers that this was the reward for completing the home mission and comments that this rigid inheritance thing seems to be quite complex. He needed technology points to identify them. When suddenly, someone calls him. So Shu Lia comments that he heard sounds of hungry wild boars while he was cutting the meat. The protagonist is confused. Shu Lia continues saying that he already suspected they would appear, and that is why he spent some time looking and finally found several wild boar piglets. Suddenly, a system window appears saying, "Secondary mission activated. Domesticate the beasts. Mission objective, raise wild boar piglets and turn them into domestic animals. Reward, small chest of materials ×1. Main recipes ×1. The system asks if he wanted to accept this mission. The protagonist thinks about the mission to domesticate the beasts, and, analyzing the number 1, he wonders if it could be part of a series of missions. He instructs Xun Li and Dada to go fetch the wild boar piglets, and both understand. He emphasizes that he wants all the piglets and that they should not leave any behind, warning them to be careful when catching them. At that moment, a system window appears, indicating that he has accepted the secondary mission of domesticating the beasts. Dada grabs Xun Li's arm and starts running, leaving him desperate, while shouting that he will take care of it properly and that he was already on his way back. The protagonist sighs lightly and comments that he'll need to build a stable before they return. Approaching Annabelle and another person, he calls them to come with him after the meal, as he will teach them something new. Later that day, as the sun sets, Annabelle and 2 other men carry logs of wood, and Annabelle questions why the king asked them to gather so many branches. Another man tells him to be quiet, as the protagonist always knows what he's doing. Agun is amazed at how quickly they gathered the logs. Annabelle asks what he was doing, and he responds that the king said that it was called straw rope, a material stronger than the vines they used, and this was amazing because the straw was much softer. He explains that it's just a matter of tying several knots to have a rope. Annabelle is confused and asks how to do this. The protagonist asks Annabelle to stop the drama and do something else. After planting a piece of wood in the ground, the protagonist creates a circle with several holes. The tribe's members ask the protagonist what he wants them to do, and he asks them to follow him. Holding a piece of wood, he instructs them to take the woods and straw ropes and do exactly as he is doing, and that each should make at least 5 of these. After placing the assembled wood in the hole he prepared, he asks them to secure the top part well with a braided straw rope. The assembled woods and adjusted with the rope form a cabin, and now only the final touch is missing. He instructs them to carefully spread the straw over the exterior after finishing. A system window then appears indicating a simple stable built. The protagonist comments that it seems the stable is good, and the tribe's people begin to celebrate the good job. Suddenly, the members of the tribe run past the protagonist at high speed, and after all entering the stable, they start arguing about who arrived first. A woman comments that this home created by the king was for her, where she would raise her children, while another mentions that her children are about to be born. Displeased, the protagonist comments that this stable was not for them, when suddenly Dada and Xiu Lie arrive bringing the piglets. The little one comments that they rescued all the piglets. Dada reports that there are 8 piglets in total, and that they are all safe. The protagonist praises them for the great job, and pointing to the stable, asks them to put the beautiful wild boar piglets inside. Desperate, a man jumps towards him, asking him not to do that. Embracing him, he questions how the protagonist would offer a cozy home to these wild boars. Hwan hugs him from behind and comments that it was not easy to create such a cozy home where they could sleep, and that everyone wanted to live inside it. Another man comments that he also wanted a home where he could live with the king. The protagonist pushes the two away and yells for them to back off and keep their distance. He mentions that after building a more comfortable wooden dwelling, he will not allow them to enter, as if they insist on staying in the stable. It's fine by him. Hwan questions if he will build a better home for them, expressing that he no longer wants to live there, although Lang still wants to. The man, in desperation, changes his mind and prefers that the boar piglets stay there. The protagonist thanks them for their understanding and asks the little one to take the piglets inside. Shunlai responds that he is already on his way. Agun questions if these wild boars were not meant for consumption and asks if they would be pets. The king suggests, wouldn't it be better if they could have enough meat by raising these boars, eliminating the need to hunt? Agun is excited by the proposal. The protagonist explains that by providing a good home for the boars, they will reproduce more, ensuring a prosperous life, while the little one watches the piglets with drooling mouth. He comments that even if they don't fully understand, they just need to follow him to the end. Suddenly, a system window appears saying, Beast Taming Mission Complete. Rewards, small chest of materials, main recipe. Current attributes, +1 tech points. Stamina, 2. Strength, 3. Agility, 2. Prestige, 0. Technology, 12. Territory, none. The protagonist decides to open the rewards. After the small chest opens, a system window appears saying that he obtained a bag of salt from the small chest of materials. He learned how to prepare roasted eggplants, sautéed peanuts, fried eggs, roasted lamb leg, and sautéed clams. The protagonist is astounded by the rewards of salt and recipes and wonders if being a cook is more important than technological development. Another system window appears saying, unlocking more recipes, he obtains more rewards. The protagonist realizes that he will need to pay more attention to acquiring all types of ingredients and seasonings in order to unlock more options. That night, as everyone slept around the fire, the protagonist thanks Shunli for being there, as he was injured in the morning and now needed to stand guard at night. Shunli explains that yesterday, Shigu almost killed the king because of a trap he set, and he thought it fair to accompany him this night. Chen hugs him and asks if he thinks he is taking revenge with this, as he is not the type to hold grudges against his own. The little one thanks him. The protagonist comments that he would like to ask a question before he forgets, asking if there are other clans nearby besides theirs. The little one confirms that there are, but they are not friendly and are quite different from them. The protagonist, surprised, begins to inquire about these clans and asks him to tell more about them, such as where they live and how many there are. The little one mentions that he knows 3 clans in the region, the Yellen Clan, the Hwan Clan, and the Jui Clan. He apologizes for having said earlier that they lived close by, but in fact, they reside quite far away, requiring at least a day and a night to visit them. The protagonist then requests that he describe these 3 clans in detail, preferably separately, and with more information than usual. The little one begins by explaining that the Yellen Clan is the closest, located to the east, through the forest, near the land of the Black Bulls. They have a population of about 30 to 40 people, do not like conflicts, but are excellent at traveling long distances. Their leader is a woman known for her strong and difficult personality. The Hwan Clan has between 30 and 40 inhabitants and lives to the south, on an island in the middle of the sea. Its members have an intimidating appearance and often engage in internal conflicts. The Jui Clan is the strongest of the 3, with the largest population. The little one mentions that he used to live in the mountains to the southeast, and that on some occasions, he came down the mountains with them, saying that the leader to whom they attribute supernatural powers. To demonstrate this, he defeated a saber-toothed tiger with his own hands, and the little one advises not to provoke them. The protagonist analyzes the clans and considers that the Yellen Clan would be the most appropriate to form an alliance, as joining them and increasing the population could be beneficial. He plans to proceed cautiously and seek a way to negotiate a peaceful alliance. Suddenly, a shadow appears behind the protagonist, asking if he doesn't feel cold sleeping that way. Dada hugs him, and noticing that he is still awake, suggests that they do something exciting together that night. Chen is surprised by the invitation and refuses, and Dada, making a cute face, asks if she doesn't look like a kitten. Chen, embarrassed, responds that she looks more like a saber-toothed tiger, and then picks up the little one and starts running, saying that Shunli needed his help and that he would talk to her later. Dada is sad about the reaction. Later, at dawn, the protagonist and the little one were on a tree. Shunli notices something moving in the sands and mentions that they had arrived. The two watch attentively as a shadow chases something. Meanwhile, the protagonist assesses the situation as they hunt some birds, and one of them shouts that he will cut it into pieces, at which point a system window opens. Dodo bird. Bird, columbiforms, columbidae. Nature, docile. Meat quality poor, egg production high. Suddenly, a member of the Hwan clan catches a dodo. The protagonist observes that after a long wait during the night, the members of the Hwan clan have finally arrived. They start celebrating the capture of a dodo, but soon get involved in an argument, and a clan member wielding a bone sword demands that they hand over the dodo, or threatens to decapitate a fellow clan member, who bravely challenges him to back down. From the top of the tree, the protagonist comments that indeed they are quarrelsome but simple-minded, and wonders if there are about 30 of them. He ponders that if he could incorporate them into his group, not only would he increase his numbers, but he would also secure resources like the dodo birds. However, the little one points out that they don't even have half their number, and that in a fight, they wouldn't be able to win. The protagonist acknowledges that this is indeed a problem, but suggests that with stronger weapons, they could win. He thinks that before confronting the other clan, they need to eliminate the herd of black cows to use the new resources in the creation of more powerful weapons and equipment. The protagonist decides to return and mentions that there is much to be done. Later, at the tribe's camp, while some members transport wood, Annabelle, clearly shaken, notices something and shouts that the king has returned. He mentions that they looked for him everywhere for a while and thought that the king had abandoned them, bringing relief to everyone to see him there. Chen apologizes for causing concern, but emphasizes that there is still much work to be done. He tells Annabelle to continue training with the wooden spears. Disappointed with the order, he accepts. Chen adds that Agun will be in charge of teaching them to throw. With only one day available, he must try to prepare them as best as possible, understanding the importance of the task. Seeing them, the protagonist sighs, knowing that his time is limited. While he is deep in thought, someone calls out to him. It was the muscular woman, holding a leaf. She mentions that this leaf is the most comfortable for cleaning oneself after pooping. He agrees and asks her to gather the other women. He explains that he needs hands to help sharpen the wooden spears. He also asks her to collect some rocks, as he plans to teach them how to make stone axes. The muscular woman nods, confirms, and says she will bring the sisters right away. A while later, as the protagonist is making a spear, the muscular woman returns with another woman, carrying some stones, and asks him to check if the rocks are suitable. He replies that they are perfect, noting that the stones would work well as whetstones. The protagonist explains that they should first rub one piece of rock against another until a sharp edge or point is achieved, then tie it to a wooden stick using a straw cord, and with that a stone axe would be made. The women are amazed by him and remark that he is incredible and truly a god. Suddenly a system window appears stating, he invented a new skill, stone grinding, technology points +1, current stats, physique 2, strength 3, agility 2, prestige 0, technology 14, territory none. He is stunned, questioning why he only received 10 points for making fire and just 1 for creating wooden items. He sighs, not caring about the result, and asks the women to follow his instructions and show him the results later. Suddenly, the muscular woman calls out, saying she finished and asks him to take a look. He is impressed to see a double-bladed axe and comments that she is quite talented. She says she remembered that the king's divine axe looked like that, so she tried to replicate it. Another system window appears stating, conditions fulfilled. First, transition from the old Stone Age to the new Stone Age. Second, helped a tribe member reveal her talent. Hidden resource, talent discovery activated. He wonders what the hidden resource is. Looking at the muscular woman, he sees her talent, toolmaker. He realizes that the talent discovery feature can reveal someone's unique talent. He figures out that toolmaker is likely the muscular woman's talent. Embarrassed by his gaze, she asks why he is staring at her. The protagonist is at a loss for words, and then asks the other women to make a similar stone axe to that pattern. But first, they need to make as many wooden spears as possible. They understand the king's request. Later, someone counts the weapons in the camp. The muscular woman, holding a spear, shouts that the 30th one is ready. The protagonist praises her, saying she is amazing, noting that she made more than half of them. She asks if the new spears she made are better than the previous ones. After inspecting them, he confirms and says she is very talented at times like this. The protagonist notices something wrong with her hands. Taking them in his own, he remarks that it was a long day of sharpening rocks and making wooden spears, and she worked very hard. The muscular woman says it's nothing. Enchanted, she adds that as long as she can help the king, nothing else matters. Suddenly, the other women appear, showing their hands. Ah Yu mentions that her hands are also sore, and Shou Shou asks if he doesn't care about them too. Embarrassed, the protagonist says he does care about them and acknowledges that they worked hard as well. Ah Yu asks why he doesn't blow on her hands, which irritates the muscular woman. Suddenly, he runs off, saying the spears made today are enough. telling them to take a break and mentioning that he will go check on the men's training results. The women are left confused. As he walks away, he mutters about how that scared him, when suddenly he hears someone shout that they are ready and to let go. The protagonist is startled to see a massive log coming toward him. He ducks at the last second and shouts, questioning what the hell was happening. Seeing the tied log, he wonders if it was a moving target, and comments that they were taking the training very seriously. Agun, looking at the spears embedded in the logs, announces that the winning team was Hwang and Lang, and asks to reset the wooden target, as the next team should get ready. Agun is surprised to see the king. The protagonist asks how the training is going. Agun responds that everyone made great progress today, and mentions that they can already hit moving targets. Suddenly, the protagonist can see Agun's talent, master of throwing. Agun continues, saying that although Yeju has great strength, he struggles with timing his throws and only unleashes his full potential when paired with Annabelle. As for Tarzan, he doesn't speak much but is one of the most dedicated practitioners and was the first to master the technique. What surprised him the most were Hwang and Lang Gu. Separately, they are nothing special, but together, they can throw 4 wooden spears in a short time. And the most incredible thing is that they all hit the target, scoring the highest points. The protagonist remarks that this is excellent, and with this, they can handle the black cows tomorrow. Agun asks if he is sure, and the protagonist confirms, but adds that, just to be safe, they should bring the secret weapon as well. Nagun gets excited about the idea of the secret weapon. Later that night, as some birds fly overhead, the protagonist, who is cutting something with an axe, sighs and comments that after working all night, he is finally finished. He recalls when he talked about the secret weapon. Holding some leaves, he instructed the hunters to collect as many as possible, mentioning that if anyone had cuts on their hands, they should avoid touching them. In the present, he notes that the system identified the black leaves as a natural paralytic drug, and that with some luck, their extract could paralyze those monsters. Suddenly, someone calls out, announcing they have brought all the wooden spears. The muscular woman asks why he made that hole in the stone. He explains that it is a stone mortar, and that soon they would understand its use. Suddenly, a system window appears stating, Statistics. He successfully invented the stone mortar. Technology point +1. Physique, 2. Strength, 3. Agility, 2. Prestige, 0. Technology, 14. Territory, none. He asked the muscular woman to call all the women and use the stone pestle to crush the green herbs in the hole in the stone, and then apply the sap to the tips of the wooden spears. Yeju questions him, saying they also wanted to play with the pestles. The protagonist, looking at the hunters, tells them they should rest, as he will need everyone for tomorrow's battle. The hunters comment that the king is badass. The next day, as the sun rises, the protagonist is on top of a tree, eating a skewer. He remarks that, just as he imagined, grilled meat tastes much better with salt. Suddenly, the muscular woman, holding a spear, shouts that the king is ready. She throws the spear in his direction. Chen catches the spear and says it's time, instructing the ladies to stand guard and protect the children, and for the rest to grab their weapons and follow him to the mountain. The tribe gets excited. The protagonist, wielding his mighty axe, shouts that it's time to show the monster who is boss. Sometime later, on the mountain, the tribe watches the herd of black cows. Hwang asks if the protagonist is going to act as bait alone, and questions if it isn't dangerous for him to do that alone. Annabelle says the king is powerful and wonders what danger he could face, urging everyone to keep their eyes forward. The small one tells everyone to get ready, as there is movement near the riverbank. Annabelle instructs the 2 women with him to deliver the spears on time, especially to Agun, emphasizing that they cannot leave him without a spear. He comments that the king is taking a big risk and that they cannot afford any mistakes there. 10 minutes earlier, in the forest near the herd, the protagonist was hiding among the bushes. He thinks that, based on his previous experience, it should be safe to escape straight to the stone mountain. Watching a cow drinking water, he continues to ponder that he needs to be cautious and decides to start by luring a small one first. He begins to leap from bush to bush, thinking it was best to be extra careful or his life could be in danger. Then he throws a stone at the cow, hitting it square on the head. He starts shouting, calling it horned and saying it couldn't catch him, and that they were all fools. Suddenly, a small group becomes enraged and charges at the protagonist. He realizes with some regret that there are 3 of them instead of 1 and admits that this is a bit dangerous. He then starts running toward the cliff, pursued by the black cows. As he emerges from the forest, he shouts for Shigui to aim at the first black bull. After dodging an attack from a black cow, The protagonist shouts for everyone to focus all their attacks on it. Annabelle, standing on the cliff, shouts for everyone to prepare their spears and orders them to throw on his command. Suddenly, he gives the command, and all the hunters throw their spears, striking one of the cows. Even with its body full of spears, it tries to catch the protagonist, who, using his agility, manages to jump onto the cliff. Gun, positioned on the cliff, prepares his spear, and as he throws it, he shouts for it to die already. The spear hits its neck, and it falls to the ground. The protagonist clings to the edge with one hand as the other cows start colliding with the cliff. Suddenly, the stone he is holding onto breaks, making him fall. However, a hand grabs him. Annabelle manages to catch him in time and starts pulling him up, asking if he is okay. The protagonist shouts for everyone to keep attacking, saying they have to kill them while they are still weak. The hunters keep throwing their spears as the cows stop in front of the cliff. Annabelle starts giving instructions on which ones to target. The muscular woman asks if the protagonist is all right. He responds that she doesn't need to worry about him, as he is fine, and asks her to keep helping Annabelle and the others. Looking at Shirgu, the protagonist can see his hidden talent. Talent, leader. He thinks it's no surprise since Shigu commands so well, and realizes it was worth making him the attack leader. Annabelle remarks that the cows are acting strangely. The cows start to stagger, and some have already collapsed. The protagonist comments that he didn't expect the tranquilizer to work so quickly, and wonders if they might not be able to go wild now. Suddenly, the small one spots some strange movement and reports that more black cows are advancing. A group of them starts crossing the river toward the cliff at high speed. The protagonist thinks they are coming faster than he imagined and probably got alerted by the noise. He tells everyone not to panic, saying everything is going according to plan, and they just need to focus on dealing with the three below, making sure they don't escape. One of the cows lets out a huge roar. The protagonist explains that the poison slows their movements and instructs them to aim the spears at the hind legs to prevent them from escaping. The cows, their bodies full of spears, begin to crawl, trying to get away. However, the hunters keep throwing spears, hitting their backs and causing them to fall near the forest. The protagonist calls for the attack to stop. Annabelle protests, saying now is not the time to be soft-hearted and that they need to kill them before the other group arrives. Chen asks how many spears they still have left. The muscular woman replies that they have 28 spears remaining. The protagonist asks the small one how many cows are in the herd that is on the way. He responds that there are about 20. The protagonist explains that's why he asked to stop the attack, because their number of spears was limited. Agun questions that if they gave up now, all the effort to deal with the 3 cows would be wasted. He responds that, no, it's part of the plan, and explains that he never intended to face the entire herd with just a few of them. As the rest of the herd approaches with a massive shadow in the middle, the protagonist explains that from the beginning, his goal was to take down the herd's leader, and after defeating the leader, the remaining cows would simply scatter and flee. But for the plan to lure the leader to work, they needed bait, which is why he needed the 3 cows alive and couldn't let them escape. However, the original plan only involved using 1 cow as bait, but dealing with 2 extra ones had already used up a considerable number of spears. Suddenly, the small one shouts, alerting them that he can see the black cow's leader and that it looks like a giant monster. The herd leader starts to prepare and suddenly lets out a powerful roar toward them, making the cliff begin to tremble. Looking down the cliff, the small one warns everyone to be careful because they are coming. The black cows begin to collide with the cliff, causing it to shake. The hunters wonder why they are crashing into the cliff and ask if they've gone mad. The protagonist shouts not to stop the attack, explaining that the herd leader doesn't want to deal with them directly and is just giving orders to the herd from afar. Suddenly they hear a loud noise. Hwan wonders what it is. Looking down, they realize part of the cliff is crumbling, and one of the hunters shouts that the stone wall is breaking. Desperate, the protagonist yells for everyone to retreat and find shelter. They start moving away from the cliff's edge, but the muscular woman is caught off guard by a crack and ends up falling off the cliff. Seeing her on the ground, the protagonist is worried, and along with the hunters, descends the cliff. While the hunters protect them, the protagonist picks her up in his arms and tells her not to worry, reassuring her that they will take care of her. The hunters form a circle to protect her from the black cows. One of the hunters asks his brother what they should do, whether to flee or fight. Hwang, facing the cows, tells him not to be reckless and to wait for the king's order. Holding his axe, the protagonist realizes the cow's plan and instructs his people to be cautious and look out for one another. He admits to himself that the herd leader has already figured out his trap and didn't expect the leader to be so intelligent. Annabelle shouts for everyone to grab their weapons, saying they will go down to protect the king. but the protagonist quickly yells for them not to do that. They should stay up there and focus on attacking the first cows that approach. The group of hunters on the ground braces themselves as the herd charges at them. However, Tarzan quickly throws his spear, hitting one of them squarely. The protagonist seizes the moment and, with a single strike, slices its neck. As the cow writhes from the cut, Tarzan grabs him and retreats. Another cow charges at Hwan, who throws his spear with incredible strength. However, the cow manages to block it with its hoof and rushes toward him. Hwan manages to grab its horn. Meanwhile, his brother seizes the opportunity and throws a spear straight into its eye. Atop the cliff, Annabelle shouts for the other hunters to attack. As a result, several spears fly toward the cow, and before it realizes it, it's too late. The protagonist's group manages to defeat 2 of them while the rest of the herd stares at them. However, the herd hears a noise and begins to retreat. The protagonist is confused, thinking and wondering if they received an order to retreat, realizing that the leader has finally decided to join the battle. Suddenly, it starts to rain on the battlefield. The protagonist and Tarzan prepare to face the leader, who is walking toward them. Taking a deep breath, the leader gets ready to unleash a powerful attack. The protagonist realizes and shouts for everyone to get out of the way quickly. The herd leader then unleashes a powerful blast of energy. The protagonist and Tarzan manage to dodge it. The attack strikes the cliff, and the hunters on top are terrified at the destruction, realizing just how powerful the attack was. The protagonist questions what kind of attack this is, impressed by the display of power, and comments that it shattered everyone's morale with a single move. He says he'll draw the leader's attention and instructs the hunters to take the muscular woman and head north. The hunters understand the king's command. The protagonist dodges an attack from the leader and tells the hunters on the cliff to wait for his signal. Facing the leader, he declares he will be his opponent. However, the herd leader charges at him with incredible speed. The protagonist becomes anxious and uses his axe to block the attack, but the leader's strength is so immense that the ground around the protagonist cracks, and with a massive impact, Chen is thrown far away. The leader then prepares to advance with great speed, and with a leap, lunges at him. The protagonist gets up and starts running toward the cliff. Quickly, he notices a path carved out by the leader's previous attack and begins to climb the cliff while escaping. Unaware of the protagonist's plan, the herd leader, moving at high speed, crashes into the cliff, creating a massive explosion. The hunters on the ground worry about the king and are terrified upon seeing the herd leader, wondering what to do next. The leader begins walking toward the hunters on the ground, and one of them shouts for everyone to hold their ground and get ready for battle. Hwang, holding his spear, declares that even if he dies, he will take out one of the monster's eyes. Suddenly, a powerful axe strike cuts off the herd leader's horn, leaving it confused about what just happened. The protagonist emerges from a hole in the cliff and says he has to thank the herd leader. Thanks to the crater the leader made, he was able to hide at a critical moment. With that, he summons his axe again, though he is seriously injured. The other hunters are relieved to see the king. The protagonist calls for Annabelle, who quickly responds. Chen tells him to be ready and awaits his command. He charges at the herd leader, and the other hunters take advantage and attack as well. Hwang leaps onto the leader, but the monster manages to pierce his stomach with its horn. His brother, desperate, throws his spear at the leader, striking its leg. Hwang, holding onto the horn, tries to bring it down. Tarzan seizes the opportunity and stabs the monster's hind leg, but the herd leader grabs him. Hwang calls out to the protagonist while holding the horn. Chen jumps onto the monster's head and declares he's there. With a powerful kick, he strikes the herd leader, forcing it to release Tarzan. Hwang takes the chance to escape. The monster, enraged, prepares and launches another attack, a devastating blast of energy. The protagonist and the other hunters manage to evade it, but it nearly hits the muscular woman. Using his agility, the protagonist leaps onto the monster and shouts for it to stop attacking. With a mighty axe blow, he strikes the herd leader, cutting into its shoulder. As the monster falls, he shouts for Annabelle and Agun to attack. Shigu yells for everyone to aim at the wound, and a rain of arrows descends upon the monster. The herd leader screams in pain and collapses, raising a massive cloud of dust. The hunters on the ground wonder if they've won. Annabelle and the others on the cliff begin celebrating their victory. The protagonist walks beside the monster as the other hunters remark how badass the king is. Looking at the herd, the protagonist senses something is wrong and questions what they are waiting for. Suddenly, under a flash of lightning, the herd leader starts to rise with a sinister look. The protagonist is frozen in fear and, looking back, realizes he's in serious trouble. The monster lands a full-force punch on him, sending him flying, then launches a powerful ground attack, causing the other hunters to be thrown back. Enraged, the monster begins unleashing a barrage of energy blasts. After being hurled against the cliff, badly injured, the protagonist realizes he was careless. He stares at the out-of-control monster, and suddenly, the herd leader pulls out one of the spears lodged in its body and throws it at the protagonist. Frozen in fear, he wonders if it's going to end this way, if he's really going to die there. Suddenly, the muscular woman leaps in front of the spear, taking the hit. The protagonist is in shock, seeing her on the ground, and starts to reflect on the moments they shared at the camp. He glares at the monster, furious, and curses it, questioning how it dares to hurt her. A mysterious energy starts to surge through his arm and into his axe, when suddenly, a system window pops up, warning him. System alert. Energy overload detected. Warning, warning. The protagonist declares that they're going to hell together. He unleashes a powerful attack that strikes the monster, cutting it in half. He then stares at the herd, demanding to know who's next. The herd, terrified, backs away as the protagonist, exhausted, shouts for them to die. Suddenly, one of the cows roars, causing them all to retreat. Chen drops his axe as a system window alerts him that his life is in danger. He starts vomiting blood and falls to his knees, losing consciousness as the system keeps warning him. He looks at the injured hunters, one of whom is crying over the muscular woman's body. Before passing out, he uses a hemostatic ointment. Sometime later, he starts to open his eyes and sees a strange silhouette above him. Yu is relieved to see that he's finally awake. He is confused to see her and asks if they are in the barn. She replies that they're not and explains that after the battle, they drove away the black cows, moved to a new place, and built this shelter just for him. She asks him to rest while she informs the others. He asks her to wait and tries to get up. She asks if he has any orders for her. Looking at the strange mark on his arm, he asks how the muscular woman and Tarzan are doing. She responds that when they found him, he was near death, but recovered quickly. After waking up, Tarzan has been outside protecting him ever since, and although the muscular woman's injuries were more severe, thanks to the king's divine medicine, she will be fine, and everyone else is okay too. He sighs, relieved to hear that everyone is all right. She says that everyone's injuries have improved over the past 4 days. He panics upon realizing he's been asleep for 4 days. She is confused by his reaction. Suddenly he opens a system window. Settlement. Objective: help build a home for the primitive people. Establish a tribe and expand the population to 50. Time remaining, 11 days. He thinks there's no time to rest. He needs to act now. Yu wonders why the king always seems to stare at nothing for some reason. As he tries to get up, he groans in pain. She insists that he needs to rest and that now isn't the time, but he interrupts her, saying it's fine, and asks her to call Annabelle immediately, telling him only that he has woken up and nothing more. He'll explain later. She understands and leaves the cabin. Tarzan, standing guard, is confused to see her leaving. The protagonist, thinking, realizes he is powerless after the battle, and this secret must not get out. It's not just about failing the mission. Looking at the map, he reflects that, luckily, after driving away the black cows, the tribe moved there right away, and they need to quickly build a fence around the area and later replace it with a wooden wall. The planting and livestock areas should be set up next. Suddenly, someone informs him that Annabelle is there and asks if he can listen from outside. Annabelle says it's great to see the king well. The protagonist tells him he has a very important task for him. Annabelle understands. Chen asks him to come closer and listen carefully. After Annabelle approaches the cabin, he replies that it's no problem and assures the king he can rest easy, asking him to leave it to him. The protagonist thinks that isn't enough. They can't repeat the same mistakes they made when hunting the black cows. This time he needs to ensure everything goes off without a hitch. He calls Tarzan and tells him he has something for him to do, to retrieve the hide and bones of the herd leader, making sure the hide remains as intact as possible. Tarzan is confused by the request, but the protagonist hands him his powerful axe. Tarzan is terrified to see the king giving him his precious divine artifact. He leaves confidently, vowing to complete the task. Outside the cabin, Yu remarks that the protagonist needs to rest. He responds that he can't, and says he has something to discuss with her. Since there's no one else outside, she can come in. She understands and starts entering the cabin. He explains that he sent the others away because he has an important mission for her. Suddenly, she begins taking off her clothes and says she's ready. Annoyed, the protagonist yells that she misunderstood and tells her to put her clothes back on. Embarrassed, she does. He clarifies that he needs her help to perform a play of sorts. She is confused, wondering what kind of play this could be. He explains that he plans to send someone to negotiate with the Yellen Clan, aiming to convince them to join the tribe and follow his orders. She mentions that the Yellen Clan has more people than their tribe and questions why they would agree. Holding the monster's head, He intends to show them the tribe's strength and persuade them that joining is the right choice. He explains that there are 2 reasons he chose her for this task. First, the Yellen clan is led by women, so as a woman, she would be able to communicate better. Second, only she knows the truth about his condition. He reveals that the powerful attack left his body with catastrophic damage. Although the ointment prevented it from worsening, he still needs something more to heal properly. She reflects on the plan and asks if he wants to intimidate the Yellen clan with a bluff. She says she knows exactly what to do and asks him to leave the matter in her hands. The next day, Little One and Ah Yu were walking toward the Yellen clan, carrying a backpack. He mentioned that they were almost there, and even though the Yellen clan didn't like conflicts, they shouldn't provoke them at that moment. She understood and asked him to lead the way and leave the rest to her. Little One complained that the king was so unfair for making such a beautiful outfit just for her. Suddenly, they stepped into the bushes, and he said that the Yellen clan was just ahead. Looking down, they saw the Yellen clan enjoying themselves, bathing under a waterfall. Ah Yu remarked that Shun seemed strangely familiar with the place. He became embarrassed and pointed out a beautiful woman with green hair, saying she was the one they were looking for, the queen of the Yellen clan. Ah Yu was enchanted, commenting that she was very beautiful. Little One warned her not to be fooled by the queen's appearance, as he had heard that she had eaten many of her suitors. Ah Yu doubted it, saying it was impossible for such a beautiful woman to eat people. Little One insisted it was true. Suddenly, a few sentinels appeared behind them without warning and captured them. Later, the sentinels took them straight to the queen, reporting that they had caught the 2 sneaking around. They claimed the pair was some kind of waste and wanted to see her. The queen, holding her whip, observed them. Little One shouted that they weren't waste, but ambassadors, the title given by the king. Suddenly, something caught the queen's attention. She was indignant and commented that this was very rude, declaring that the woman would become a slave, the man would be thrown to the fish, and the piece of meat would serve as dinner for several days. Little One panicked at the queen's decision, and as one of the guards dragged him away, he screamed for Ah Yu to save him. Quickly, Ah Yu shouted that she had thought the queen of the Yellen clan was more perceptive, but was mistaken. The mountain of meat they planned to offer would now go to the Hwan clan. The queen told the guard to wait a moment and let them finish talking. She stood up, walked toward Ah Yu, and questioned her about the mountain of meat. Ah Yu confirmed, saying it was from the herd of black cows that lived near the river to the north. The queen asked if they wanted to join forces with her clan to hunt the black cow herd. Ah Yu challenged the idea of joining forces, saying they shouldn't underestimate her clan, as the black cow herd was no match for them, and now the land by the river belonged to them. The 2 stared at each other, creating immense pressure. The people of the Yellen clan were in disbelief, claiming the woman was lying, as they had nearly been trampled by that herd before. The queen was taken aback and asked Ah Yu if she knew what happened to those who lied to her. Ah Yu replied that even the herd leader had been slain by the king, and if the queen didn't believe her, she could visit the tribe and see for herself. Suddenly, someone approached the queen and suggested that it might be a trap. Ah Yu questioned the idea of it being a trap and declared that the king was powerful and benevolent, capable of wiping out the entire Yellen clan if he wished. While one of the sentinels restrained him, Little One, desperate, shouted that she was right, but they weren't there to attack. They had only come to bring some gifts and an invitation from the king. He questioned why they still doubted them. Ah Yu affirmed it was true and added that if the queen didn't have the courage to come in person, she could send someone else to collect the meat. The queen, with an intimidating look and swinging her whip, warned that she'd better not be playing games. Later, Little One guided them to their tribe and mentioned that it was just ahead. When they arrived, he shouted, announcing their return. Annabelle, carrying a log, told him not to make such a fuss and to hurry up and help with the house construction, as the king was waiting by the riverbank. Little One understood. One of the sentinels approached the queen and asked what those houses were. The queen was confused, not knowing how to respond. Ah Yu led her to meet the king. Upon meeting him, Ah Yu announced that she had arrived and that the Yellen clan people were there. The queen, upon seeing the protagonist, grew uneasy, sensing a strong killing intent emanating from him and remarking that it felt like facing an ancient beast. With an intimidating gaze, the protagonist praised Ah Yu for doing a great job. Suddenly, the Yellen clan members were confused when they heard a noise coming from the nearby cabin. The muscular woman, after hitting Hwan, covered his mouth to keep him quiet. Tarzan, who was also inside the cabin, explained that the king had ordered the wounded to hide there so they wouldn't be seen, and he asked Hwan to be more careful. Hwan replied that he was just curious to see what the queen of the Yellen clan looked like. The protagonist expressed his pleasure that the queen had accepted the invitation and come to his lands. Irritated, one of the sentinels demanded to know where the meat they mentioned was. The protagonist replied that it was around the cabin and they could take as much as they wanted, as long as they could find a way to carry it. They were astonished by the number of slain black cows. A group of them approached one of the black cow carcasses. Langu pointed out that theirs was the one nearby. One of the sentinels, wearing a mask, approached to cut off a piece of meat. When she tried to stab her bone knife into the cow's hide, the knife broke. The group of hunters nearby burst out laughing. Enraged, one of the sentinels demanded to know what was so funny and accused them of merely getting lucky, catching a few cows while they fought among themselves. The hunters grew irritated and challenged her, asking if she was trying to start a fight. Suddenly, the protagonist hurled his axe between the two groups, slicing the black cow's body in half. The sentinels were shocked by the king's power, and the queen was astonished. The sentinels wondered what kind of weapon that was, far superior to their ironwood clubs and bone knives. The protagonist told them to use his axe to cut some meat. The sentinels couldn't believe the damage the axe had caused. Langu remarked that they had provoked them first and asked why they should help. Irritated, the protagonist ordered him to do as he said. Reluctantly, Langu began cutting the meat for them, grumbling about their luck. The king assured the queen that he would make sure they carried the meat without trouble, as he always kept his word, since that was his principle. The queen commented that he was quite refined and asked how they managed to defeat the black cowherd. He replied that it depended on future developments, whether mutual understanding or personal experience. The protagonist concluded the conversation, telling the queen to take the meat and leave. The queen called him a stinky, cold-hearted man. As he watched her, the protagonist thought that his last throw had been a bit excessive just for show. If not for the leather bandages, his wounds would likely have started bleeding again. Suddenly, one of his wounds began to bleed. He noticed and became worried. Ayu quickly drew the queen's attention and mentioned that they had some extra stone axes they could give to the Yellen Clan. She explained that while they couldn't compare to the king's divine axe, they were still strong enough to cut through the black cowhides and slice the meat. The queen refused, saying she didn't need such crude weapons, as they weren't suitable for them. As she left, she remarked that they too had powerful weapons they hadn't shown, and hoped they wouldn't have to point them at them someday. The queen ordered the sentinels to take what they could and prepare to leave. Ayu told them that if it wasn't enough, they could come back for more, but the sooner the better, as other clans had also received a share. As the Yellen clan departed, Ayu waved and said they were always welcome there. A bit away from the protagonist's camp, as the Yellen clan made their way home, the queen asked how the investigation went. Suddenly, an elite group appeared and reported to the queen that they had discovered that the tribe was building something called a house. However, they mentioned that there could be wild boars inside one of them, as they had heard grunting noises. The queen was confused, wondering if they had really built such a good dwelling for the boars. One of the elite sentinels remarked that the most incredible thing was that they had mastered the power of the fire god. Another sentinel claimed that was impossible. The elite sentinel insisted that they had seen them create fire out of nowhere to roast meat. The queen was incredulous. The elite sentinel hesitated, but the queen ordered her to stop stalling and speak. She reported that there were more than 10 people in total, including some children and an old man. She suspected that they had temporarily hidden the rest of the population. The queen questioned why they didn't search more carefully. The elite sentinel explained that since the nearest trees had been cut down, they couldn't get any closer without being seen, so they had to stay hidden in the forest and observe from a distance. The queen, furious with the information, walked past the elite sentinels. Suddenly, she took out her thorned whip and struck the group, warning them that if they dared to make excuses again, they wouldn't just get one lashing. The elite group bowed and thanked the queen for not expelling them. Later, in the protagonist's cabin, he complained about the pain as Ayu approached and commented on his wound. He replied that it was fine now, as the leather bandages had strong regenerative properties and should gradually heal his injuries. The protagonist noticed her hidden talent, eloquence. Ayu was relieved to know that the king was all right. However, the protagonist thought that the talent of eloquence was quite rare. She remarked that, compared to the queen of the Yellen clan, the king must prefer her. Embarrassed, the protagonist shouted that it wasn't like that at all and told her to be quiet, as someone might be listening outside. He instructed her to let the men who were hiding come out and then stop the bleeding, asking her to help with the treatment. He said he would leave the task of cleaning the bloodstains to her and asked Tarzan to stand guard at the entrance and not let anyone approach. She understood, and staring at the king, commented that he looked so cool at that moment, winking at him, making him quickly embarrassed. As they exited the cabin, the protagonist asked Little One how the mission went. He replied that he was back and marveled at how incredible the king was, saying that the Yellen Clan had set up observation posts around the camp, just as the king had suspected. The protagonist inquired about the other task. Little One recalled that, while observing the Yellen Clan sentinels from the trees, he did exactly as the king instructed and reported that they saw only what they were meant to see and missed what they weren't supposed to. The protagonist was relieved and told Little One he had worked hard these past days. Little One replied that it wasn't difficult and said he would now go help Annabelle and the others build the houses. Little One began hopping around joyfully. Yu, seeing the others working hard, asked the king if the Yellen clan would really join them voluntarily. He replied that it was still too early to say, as the plan was only halfway done, and when they returned next time, they would proceed with the second half of the plan. Later, lying inside the cabin and looking at a system window, the protagonist commented on how tired he was. The main mission? Settlement. Objective: help build a home for the primitive people, establish a tribe and expand the population to 50. Time remaining, 11 days. The protagonist was shocked at how little time was left. He remarked that he didn't even have time to recover from his injuries. He decided to open his inventory. Basic language proficiency, basic survival booklet, basic recipes, universal map, small bag of salt, and a bit of hemostatic ointment, with only one use left. The system alerted that the mountain-splitting axe had been upgraded to the Pangu axe. New details available. Looking at the axe, he couldn't understand what was happening, and wondered when his mountain-splitting axe had become the Pangu axe. He wonders if the axe truly became a divine artifact, and how he overlooked that when he handed it over to Tung earlier. So he decides to summon the axe. Upon examining it, the system alerts: legendary weapon Pangu axe, attribute Earth, activation condition blood sacrifice, hidden ability. After releasing the power to create the world, it will drain the user's vitality to deal more damage, with destructive power relative to the user's remaining energy. He is confused, questioning if the blood sacrifice was what happened when he got injured during the battle. From the description, it seems that using the world-creating power must be perfectly timed, not too early or too late. Otherwise, it wouldn't just result in a scar on his arm. The protagonist sighs, holding his axe. He remarks that he didn't expect the weapon to evolve. He wonders if any other weapons also have hidden abilities or similar attributes. He comments that the activation conditions must differ for each weapon and decides to leave that to fate. And with just this axe, he almost got himself killed, so he decides to check the other items. He mentions that the only thing that could really be useful is the hemostatic ointment, and unfortunately, he only has enough for one use, so he decides to save it for a critical moment. Otherwise, he could definitely swing his axe around and hunt down all the nearby creatures, and no one would dare challenge him. He begins to reflect on the amount of meat the Yellen clan took, noting that it should last them for 2 days. Time is limited, and the only option left is to trust Little One for now. Suddenly, he calls for Tarzan, who is standing guard outside his cabin, and asks him to bring Little One, as he has a mission for him. Tarzan understands, and quickly brings Little One. Shun presents himself at the king's cabin. The protagonist asks if he remembers the rest of the black cow herd they chased away, and tells him he has 2 days to find the herd and report back as soon as possible. Little One replies that he'll go right away, and dashes off like the Flash. The protagonist notes that everyone has been working hard lately, and decides to prepare a small gift for everyone over the next 2 days. A few days later, the protagonist is inside his cabin, creating something, and decides to open the system window. He sees that only 9 days remain to complete the main mission and wonders if today should be the day Little One returns. Suddenly, a system window appears announcing he created a stone spearhead, gaining 1 technology point. He created a bone whistle, gaining 1 technology point. He created a horn canteen, gaining 1 technology point. He decides to give the whistle to Annabelle, as it would be more convenient for commanding during battle or hunts. The stone spearheads could increase the damage wooden spears deal, significantly raising their chances of victory if they end up in conflict with the Yellen clan. The horn canteen he plans to give to Little One, certain he will like it. Suddenly, someone calls out to him. Yu, excited, enters the cabin and announces that the houses are finished. The protagonist is surprised by something and asks her to calm down, saying they should go take a look. She asks him to put on his coat first, since he hasn't been feeling well. He thanks her for the reminder. Enchanted by the king, she insists on helping him, saying he's worked so hard and should leave these small tasks to her. The protagonist thanks her. As they step out of the cabin, he asks her to join him in looking at the results. Suddenly, someone shouts that the king is here, Annabelle is shocked and happy to see the king and says these are the houses they built according to his instructions, asking him to take a look. Seeing the house, Annabelle asks if it isn't awesome. Frustrated, the protagonist says it looks good. Annabelle starts celebrating, thrilled that they now have houses. Lang exclaims that they're done living in caves or gathering branches. Hwang suggests leaving the barn for the wild boars, as they finally have a place to live. Another hunter agrees. The protagonist says that's not what they said back then, and one of the hunters, holding a straw door, mentions he's going to place it on the cabin to close it up. After he attaches it, a system window appears, stating he successfully built a wooden house, earning 10 technology points. Physique, 2, strength, 3, agility, 2, prestige, 0, technology, 27, territory, none. He is surprised to see that building a house grants the same amount of points as making fire. Reflecting on it, he realizes that the tribe has changed a lot since he arrived. Back then, they were like wild animals, drinking blood and living off hides. Now the changes in their behavior and intelligence are becoming more apparent, and he wonders if all these changes are caused by the system, accelerating some kind of evolution. He tells Ah Yu to let him know as soon as Little One returns. She agrees. He calls her back to the cabin and mentions that they need to keep building houses, as more people will be joining them soon. Suddenly someone calls out saying they found them. Little One had returned, celebrating that he found the herd. The protagonist congratulates Little One, who is a bit out of breath. Placing a hand on his shoulder, the king comments that they can finally proceed with the second part of the plan, and that there's no time to waste, asking everyone to follow. Little One agrees. He calls for Annabelle and mentions he needs to speak with him. After the protagonist sits on the ground with Little One and Annabelle, he explains the plan and asks if they have any questions. Annabelle asks if it will work, and if it isn't too risky. Little One, confident, tells him to relax, saying he can handle it, and that when the time comes, Annabelle has to ensure the others cooperate with him. The protagonist hands Annabelle the whistle, mentioning he can use it to give commands. Annabelle smiles and thanks him. The king mentions that he prepared a gift for Little One too, but will only give it to him after the mission. Annabelle tries out the whistle, while Little One thanks the king, calling him awesome. The protagonist reminds them to act immediately according to the plan as soon as they get the signal. Later, a group of hunters waves and bids farewell to the king, who reflects on how scarce labor is, and that now they have no choice but to assign tasks to the injured as well. He asks Ah Yu to inform the muscular woman and Hwang to build a larger bonfire in front of the wooden house, but not to light it yet. She asks if it's for the arriving guests. He confirms, thinking that now all they can do is wait and see if the bait they set 2 days ago will attract a big fish. Later, Sho sees a large group emerging from the forest and approaching the camp. He is confused by the sight of so many people, wondering if they're from the Yellen Clan. Suddenly he realizes something and starts running desperately, dropping the fruits he's carrying, and shouts for the king, announcing that the Yellen Clan is here. Inside the cabin, while tending to the protagonist's wound, Ah Yu mentions that the injuries have healed, but that he should still take it easy for a few more days. He thinks it feels great to be taken care of like that, and that once he dominates the Yellen Clan, he might get more attention from Ah Yu and the queen. Suddenly, he hears someone shouting that the Yellen Clan has arrived. He comments that they've finally caught a fish and asks to bring them to see him. Later, Ah Yu is delighted to see the queen again and remarks that she looks even more beautiful than last time, saying the king is waiting for her in the palace and asking her to come in. The queen is confused, wondering what she means by palace. She recalls that the last time it was just a straw shed and questions how it's now a wooden house and how they managed to do that. She asks if the king is too scared to come out and see her, adding that they don't want to bother them in the future but will take more meat this time, as her subordinates are also eager to meet their new neighbors. That's why she brought a few more people this time, hoping she hadn't scared them. Ah Yu remarks that the king had already ordered 40 portions of meat prepared in advance, and they could take them directly. Awkwardly, Ah Yu also mentions that they hadn't brought 40 people. The queen asks if she is too worried about the Yellen clan and invites her to join them. Ah Yu responds that she's been captivated by the king's power for a long time and thanks her for the invitation. She adds that the meat is right over there, and if they couldn't take it all, they are welcome to eat as much as they want there, as per the king's suggestion. And if they have any trouble cutting the meat, they could ask for help from the camp's hunters. The queen replies that it won't be necessary and calls over one of the sentinels. Ah Yu then invites the queen to enter. Once inside the cabin, the king welcomes her to his humble abode. Embarrassed, the queen starts shaking her head, saying that this palace is quite elegant and rather decent. The protagonist, thinking, realizes she is quite interested in the houses and decides to keep charming her. He mentions that this is just a temporary makeshift home, and once they build the real palace, this place will be for the tribe. The queen, holding her whip, questions if he really intends to let the tribe live in a place like this. He replies that although it's a bit crude, they will provide better stone houses later. Suddenly, the queen uses her whip and attacks the protagonist by surprise, immobilizing him. He asks what she's doing, and with one foot on him and a bone knife in hand, she declares that no one knows men better than she does. Pressing the knife to his face, she says she has many ways to make him fall for her, and adds that offering her strange things willingly isn't enough to bring her down. The protagonist feels uncomfortable and thinks this is really bad, as it's quite thrilling. He asks if she really thinks she can force him to submit this way, and wonders if she believes he doesn't have a backup plan. In his mind, he realizes he's in trouble, with no backup plan at all, the situation spiraling out of control, and his injuries still not healed, making a direct fight even harder. Suddenly, Yu opens the door, announcing that everything is ready and they can start the festival. Seeing the scene, she comments that he shouldn't be doing that kind of thing. The queen then releases him. The protagonist remarks that they're done talking and that it's a great time for a barbecue. The queen starts glaring at Yu. He asks if she lit the bonfire. Yu confirms that she did. The queen thinks to herself that for him to withstand her coercion and remain so calm, he must either have a backup plan or simply not fear death. Compared to the men in her clan, he is quite different. Later, around the bonfire, the women of the Yellen Clan call out to the queen, mentioning how good it smells, and grill the meat for her. The protagonist, holding his bag of salt, hands it to Yu and asks her to share it with everyone. She asks if that isn't the treasure that enhances flavor and thanks the king. Holding a small amount of salt, she tells the women to sprinkle some on the meat to improve the taste. They thank her. The queen becomes wary and asks what she is putting on the meat. Yu smiles and says she doesn't have to eat it if she's afraid. The queen sighs, seeing her clan members enjoying the taste. The protagonist, noticing that the queen is also trying the meat, thinks she should eat as much as she wants, as it buys more time for Little One and Annabelle to arrive. The queen is delighted by the flavor, commenting on how delicious it is. Meanwhile, in the forest, the group of hunters is hiding among the bushes, close to the black cow herd. One of the hunters asks if they don't have enough meat already and why they need to hunt again. Annabelle explains that they're not here to hunt, and tells him to just follow orders. Suddenly, smoke starts to rise, and the hunter remarks that it's the signal. Annabelle blows the whistle, and the hunters throw their spears, hitting the black cows squarely. The cows become furious and charge at them. Annabelle, desperate, says that the herd is advancing in their direction and that this is the best chance. They need to make sure to find the new herd leader. Little One, hiding in the trees, says that he doesn't need to worry. Suddenly, he spots the leader and shouts that he's found it. Leaping onto it with his spear and driving it into its back, he yells that he's got it and claims it as his. As the herd stampedes, destroying everything in their path, Little One clings to the leader, spear still embedded, shouting that he can't give up and that he has to do it, remembering how even the previous leader became prey. Gun, perched in a tree, spots the herd and shouts that they're veering east. Annabelle says he'll signal now and blows the whistle forcefully. Little One hears the signal and realizes he needs to turn right if the direction is wrong. Using his hidden riding ability, he begins to steer the herd leader toward the correct path, guiding it through the forest with the spears stuck in its back. Meanwhile, at the camp, the queen, still eating, thinks that overeating might make her gain weight, but the food is too delicious to resist. The protagonist watches her. Suddenly, he notices birds flying frantically from the forest and realizes it's time. One of the Yellen Clan sentinels spots someone approaching the camp and tells the queen that one of the defenders left behind at the clan is here. The queen is confused by her presence. The desperate defender arrives, screaming that something terrible has happened. She trips and falls near the queen. With a wicked glare, the queen demands to know why all the fuss and asks what happened. Crying, the defender says that a herd of black cows has invaded the camp and caused destruction everywhere, and that the defenses were no match for them. The queen, outraged and in disbelief, orders everyone to return, vowing to make the herd pay. She remarks that she had always kept her distance from them and wonders what really happened, as it's a true disaster. Meanwhile, at the Yellen Clan camp, some women have been defeated, while others try to escape the attack. One warrior shouts for everyone to climb the trees and use slingshots to defend themselves, ordering an attack, but they can't inflict much damage. She becomes frustrated, realizing that the slingshots can't penetrate the thick hide. Another warrior shouts to charge and save the wounded on the ground. They leap from the trees with bone knives, yelling to kill them for the queen. However, one of the cows delivers a powerful blow, knocking them down, and prepares to crush one of the warriors under its hooves. Just as it's about to strike, the other warriors scream in fear. Suddenly, the black cow stops. Using her whip, the queen manages to halt the attack. Everyone is relieved to see that the queen and the other warriors have returned. Holding the cow with her whip, the queen demands to know how it dares to hurt her people and challenges it to a fight. With her strength, she throws the massive cow to the ground. The cow, enraged, gets up and charges at the queen. She remarks that the beast is fast, and it lands a direct hit on her. The queen screams in pain, but before she falls to the ground, someone catches her. She groans, saying that hurt. The protagonist asks if she's all right. She replies that she's fine. He tells her to stay put and handle the rest. She mentions that these monsters came out of nowhere. The group of hunters tries to hide their guilt over the attack. She warns the protagonist to be careful. The protagonist, looking serious, draws the monster's attention and, facing the herd leader, asks if they've already forgotten the beating they took. The herd leader roars at him. The protagonist thinks that the leader isn't recognizing him and wonders if his cape made from the hide of their king isn't intimidating enough. However, the herd leader begins to back away. The protagonist sighs and thinks that the intimidation tactic is working. Pointing his axe, he comments that it's quite a coincidence to meet again. The herd leader is in shock. He questions if the herd has found a new leader and remarks that he looks much weaker than the previous one. The herd leader starts to tremble. The protagonist notes that since he's there, he might as well stay for good. With that, the hunters charge forward. Annabelle shouts for the little one to advance toward the herd leader. Using his hands for support, he throws the little one, who lands on the leader. Using his skill, Mount, the little one begins to ride on the leader, distracting the herd. The protagonist calls for the queen to leave, but she refuses, stating that the herd hasn't dispersed yet. She needs to fight more. He grabs her arm and tells her to stop. The queen asks him to let go. The protagonist comments that she can't handle the monsters alone and that she hasn't brought enough people. She would only be heading toward death. The queen is left speechless. He asks why she doesn't take her people to his camp. There, she can heal their wounds and wait for the right moment to reclaim the place. He promises he will arrange enough shelter and food and ensure their safety. The protagonist urges her to look at her people and remarks that they are not in any condition to fight. Ah Yu asks if she would rather watch her people be sacrificed in vain. The queen ponders, but then shouts for her clan, asking them to help the injured and retreat to the north. The Yellen Clan begins to pull back, and a warrior shouts for them to follow, with the injured going first. The protagonist decides to leave the queen with Ah Yu, instructing her to take them back to the camp while he stays with the hunters to buy time. She understands and asks him to stay safe. Meanwhile, the hunters fight against the herd. Annabelle holds his spear, and a group of sentinels appears behind him, advancing toward the fight. One of them shouts for everyone to muster their courage and fight. Annabelle comments that they've defeated these monsters before, and that if anyone is scared, it would be better to retreat with the others. He sighs, seeing that they are not afraid. The protagonist notes that they are very brave and won't be left behind. Annabelle comprehends and leads the attack, shouting for everyone to attack. Later that day, as the sun sets, the group of injured arrives at the camp. Shosho, seeing that they have returned, asks where the king is. Ah Yu replies that he stayed behind with the hunters and mentions that there are injured people here, which is why they returned first, needing a place to rest. Shosho points to one of the houses, suggesting they can stay there. She thinks that if it weren't for the Musculosa and the others who worked hard despite being injured, they wouldn't have enough houses to shelter everyone. She asks those who are not injured to come with her to fetch water and food. The Yellen Clan people thank her and say they will go with her. Ah Yu comments that for now, she will accommodate them in those houses and ensure food and safety, so they don't have to worry. After leaving the queen inside one of the houses, Ah Yu mentions she will help the others, and then the queen should rest. The queen, shaken, thanks her. After closing the door, Ah Yu sighs and thinks that in the end, everything went well. She remembers when the protagonist explained the plan earlier. He said the focus of the entire plan was to dominate the Yellen clan at the lowest cost. They couldn't allow more injuries after such a heavy battle. She feels excited, realizing that the entire plan was flawless and that there was just one final step left. The next day, Lang is on guard at the camp. The Musculosa asks if everything went well the previous night. He replies that it did, as he was on guard and nothing happened. One of the sentinels notices something as she sees a shadow approaching. She wonders why it suddenly became cloudy. It was the Musculosa wishing her good morning. The sentinel, startled, screams, asking what that was and what she wanted. The Musculosa says that the king called the queen to the palace because it seemed they had something important to discuss in person. The sentinel understands. Later, In the makeshift palace, the protagonist looks at a system window and realizes that there are only 8 days left until the end of the main mission. He comments that time is running out. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. Yu opens it and announces that the queen of the Yellen Clan is there. Upon entering, the queen comments that Yu had already mentioned the merging of clans and that her answer is no. She states that he cannot force them just because the clan is temporarily weak. The protagonist replies that he is not forcing anyone, just proposing an agreement. He mentions that he can teach them to build houses, make weapons, and start fires, and in return, the Yellen clan needs to unite with his tribe, accept his leadership, and be under his protection. Leaning closer to the queen's face, he remarks that some things require more than just courage. She is more aware of the brutality of the Hwan clan and the strength of the Jui clan than he is. He comments that at that moment, she resembles a wounded deer, and soon the bloodthirsty beasts will follow the scent of blood to hunt her. The queen interrupts him and asks him to stop, saying she knows this, but it is not that simple, and she cannot make them accept the rules of a stranger unless... The protagonist questions her, asking her to say. She responds that unless he defeats her in a duel, that is the only way the Yellen clan will accept, and she asks if he has the courage to accept the challenge. The king, with a slight smile, agrees. The two exit the palace together. The queen gathers her people and discusses the challenge. The protagonist mentions that since the queen is injured and cannot participate in the duel, he will also not participate to ensure fairness. He chooses Annabelle to fight. Confident, he asks who will fight against him. Suddenly, one of the sentinels introduces herself, stating her name and that she accepts the challenge to fight him. He is surprised to see that she accepted and, underestimating her, tells her to be careful not to get hurt by him. Irritated, she warns him to be careful not to be pecked by her eagle. Suddenly, Annabelle charges at her, shouting that he is going to make stew with her eagle. She jumps back and throws her bone knife at him. Annabelle ignores it, thinking it is just a mere bone knife. However, he quickly realizes that the knife is heading toward the protagonist, and he cannot dodge it. He asks how she dares to throw a weapon at him. Using his axe, he manages to block the first thrown knife, but without realizing it, Yin has already thrown a second knife, which hits his bone helmet, cracking it. Quickly, he jumps toward her and yells that if that is all she has, she should die. About to strike her with his axe, another sentinel who is watching the duel throws a knife, hitting him. He questions whether the duel is fair, as someone from outside attacked him. With that, Yin takes the opportunity and charges at the protagonist. Just as she is about to hit him, Gun, who was on top of the palace, throws his spear, piercing her body. The king and the queen become serious. Yin falls to the ground. The other sentinels quickly gather around her and begin to protect her. One of them questions how the protagonist can play so dirty, claiming that bringing them all there was a huge conspiracy. The two clans start to face off, creating immense tension. One of the sentinels shouts for the queen to give the order, as they are going to kill all of them. Lang steps in front of Shosho and Yu to protect them. Suddenly, Yu looks at the protagonist. The king, looking at Yin on the ground, thinks that he was not prepared for a murder during the plan, and wonders if they were trying to provoke them into a battle. He questions whether this was an order from the queen or something that happened without her knowing. If it was the queen, he could control the situation, taking her hostage. Suddenly, the queen shouts for them all to stop, and questions whether this little plot would fool her. She says she would never tolerate such despicable threats against friends who helped them, and mentions that she does not want to investigate everyone involved in this assassination plot, but that the duel is over. The sentinels question whether they have lost. The queen comments that Yin is the most loyal and courageous warrior of the Yellen clan, saying that if it weren't for her, Yin would never have abandoned her dignity and pride to do something like this. She acknowledges that she knows the protagonist has impressive skills capable of performing miracles and kneels before him, stating that if he could be benevolent enough to spare Yin, the Yellen clan would be eternally grateful. He thinks that fortunately, it was not the worst outcome, and the initiative to control the situation is back in his hands. He reflects that the hemostatic ointment is almost finished. Extending his hand to the queen, he comments that he will not let her die, as they are all allies now. The queen thanks him. A masked sentinel urges him to hurry, as Yin is getting weaker. Looking at her, he thinks he will ignore the assassination attempt for the greater good, but there still has to be a punishment. After invoking the ointment, he decides that there is no need to heal her completely, so he applies just enough to keep her alive, leaving the rest of the ointment for treating his own wounds. He applies the ointment to her injury and instructs them to take her to rest, assuring them that she will be fine in a few days. The queen and the sentinels cannot believe the speed of the healing. One of them, astonished, comments that it is simply a miracle. They all begin to revere the protagonist, shouting that it is a miracle. Suddenly, the king places his hand on the queen's shoulder and asks if her people can join his tribe now. The queen, bashful, replies that yes. He starts laughing and remarks that this is great. Holding her waist, he says she can continue to lead her people as long as they obey his orders. The queen states that she has one final request. He is surprised by the request. She mentions that he should become her partner and that they will have a grand ceremony to confirm their relationship. The protagonist feels excited and wonders if this is a gift falling from the sky. He imagines marrying her, exchanging rings, entering the bridal chamber, having a daughter, watching her grow, seeing her marry, growing old together and then departing for the afterlife together. He feels confused imagining this future and comments that the ending is both so sad yet so beautiful. The queen notices he is different and asks if something is wrong, questioning if he does not want the partner ceremony. The protagonist hugs her and assures her that he certainly wants it. But first, she needs to rest and recover from her injuries, and he will need time to prepare for the ceremony anyway. The queen understands. The king asks everyone to withdraw, and the injured should return and recover. He invites them to the ceremony in a few days. Everyone is confused by the situation. Suddenly, a system window appears, stating that he has established the tribe and must choose a name. Attributes: name, Chen Liyi, physical 2, strength 3, agility 2, prestige 0, technology 27, population 46, cultural evolution, Stone Age civilization level 0, territory, unnamed, approximately 1 square kilometer. The protagonist is surprised to see that the population is only 46 and questions why there are 4 less. He thinks that now it doesn't matter. He decides to name the territory first. The queen looks confused at his demeanor. A system window appears stating, successfully named. He has become the chief of the fledgling tribe and needs to increase the population and complete the main mission, settlement. He thinks he will have to find a way to deal with the Yellen Clan as his wounds are almost healed. Perhaps he should advance alone and capture some members of the Yellen Clan as prisoners. He feels frustrated, as he does not know if the capture will count as population. Yu calls the queen and comments that sometimes the king behaves this way, and soon she will get used to it. The queen understands. Suddenly, the protagonist begins to hear the women whispering about him. One of them comments that when he is happy, he seems to have gone mad. Another woman says that this disheveled appearance suits him better. After all, he should be like the other men who became the queen's partners and were cut to pieces by her during the ceremony. The protagonist freezes and imagines the queen cutting him and devouring him piece by piece. He becomes desperate, questioning if the queen would eat him and wondering if that was the reason there were so few men in the clan. Suddenly, a huge shadow approaches him and calls out. He panics, thinking he is about to be devoured, but it's the musculosa. He asks if she is all right. She questions if he really intends to become the partner of that rude woman. He replies that he might need to reconsider the proposal. She becomes furious and remarks that she heard they would hold a ceremony with her. Imagining the queen devouring him, the protagonist admits that honestly, it was a bit hasty to agree to that. The musculosa asks if he is telling the truth. He comments that he thought he was getting a bride, but it turns out she is a mantis. As the musculosa lifts him up in celebration, he remarks that life is indeed unpredictable. Suddenly, Yu approaches and calls for her, questioning why she sneaked off and reminding her that she said the injured should rest. The musculosa says she wanted to stay with the king. The protagonist states that he wants to be alone and asks Yu to let the others participate in the camp construction if they want. Pulling the musculosa, Yu comments that she will inform them right away. The musculosa insists that the king should think carefully and consider her position. Yu, furious, interrupts and asks if she isn't afraid of accidentally crushing the king, urging her to come back quickly since there is a lot to do. The protagonist mentions that he needs to talk to the queen about the separation. The next day, as dawn breaks, the protagonist leaves the palace and is surprised to see the musculosa and the women of the Yellen Clan helping with the construction. Looking at the map, he comments that everyone is getting along well and that the Yellen Clan members have already started assisting with the building of houses. He thinks that today he should talk to the queen about the separation. He passes through the agricultural area of the Yellen Clan's temporary residence while they greet him. He tells them not to mind him and to just continue what they are doing. One of the women calls out to him, asking if he is there to see the queen, mentioning that she is at the river to the north and offering to take him there. As they approach the river, the woman comments that she is just ahead. One of the maids who is helping the queen with her bath informs her that the king is there. The queen asks for everyone to leave. As they pass the king, they greet him. The queen is surprised to see the king there and asks if something urgent has happened. He replies that no, he just came to check how her injuries were healing. She mentions that her injuries are nothing serious and that she should be completely fine in 2 or 3 days. With a teasing look, she asks if he would like her to come out to see with her own eyes, or if he wanted to try her out in advance. The protagonist, feeling awkward, responds that it's not necessary, and comments that he hasn't even asked her name yet. The queen questions if that is the reason he is there. He tries to play it off, and she begins to laugh, telling him he can call her Xiao Hai, the name given by the former queen. The protagonist is confused, questioning her name and the former queen. She explains that it was the former queen who gave her that name, but since she was exiled, no one has called her that since. He feels anxious, thinking that the only options are to be eaten or to be exiled, and that she could rename her clan to Mantis Clan. He asks if the former queen had a partner too, and inquires about their whereabouts. She answers that they were all eaten because it is a tradition in the clan for the queen to eat her partners, which grants her more power. He becomes desperate, pondering how such frightening words are coming from such a beautiful face. She states that it is tradition. Among the ancient queens, she has no intention of continuing this practice, as it is very ungracious. The protagonist questions whether she has never eaten anyone. She replies that she only became queen recently and has never had a partner, so naturally, she hasn't had the chance to eat anyone. He sighs. Waving, he tells her to rest and eat very well because he is going to prepare for the ceremony. As he departs, he thinks that since he doesn't have to worry about being eaten, he needs to find a good time to talk to the musculosa about it. However, the queen calls him back and comments that even if she doesn't eat people, if someone deceives him in the future, she won't hesitate to cut something off. He is shocked at the thought of someone slicing a carrot and starts to contemplate the queen's words. The woman next to her remarks that today's dish is especially easy to cut. Later, in front of the palace, he looks at the system and notes that for now, he just needs to take some prisoners and complete the main mission. Annabelle, passing by him, greets him. The king takes the opportunity to call him over, saying that he will be leaving for a while and that during that time, Annabelle will be in charge of organizing everyone's work. If there is any emergency, he should send someone to find him at the beach to the south. Annabelle understands and assures him he will take care of it. Later, at the southern sea beach, someone wonders what has happened there upon seeing the bodies of the Yellen Clan. Hidden in a tree, the protagonist questions if they were exterminated. With his spear, he decides to move closer. Meanwhile, one of the Dodu, perched atop a member of the Yellen Clan, tells the other Dodu that he was the one who defeated them. As he approaches, the protagonist drives them away, commenting that the Dodu have been wandering around, so he thinks it should be safe for now. Checking the bodies, he notices they still have elasticity, don't smell bad, and whatever the reason for the fight they were involved in, it must have happened recently. The claws on their fingers were extremely sharp, and the wounds appeared consistent with those claws. He wonders if these lunatics were having internal fights. He thinks it would be better if he could find some survivors. Walking along the beach, he notices something. Spotting a body, he questions whether it has any visible wounds. The agonized and contorted expression suggests a slow and painful death. Looking at the man's hand, he comments that it looks like it was tangled and wonders if he choked. He questions how the Hwan clan, accustomed to the water, met their end in the sea. The protagonist keeps wondering what happened there when suddenly someone calls him, saying there's trouble. The king asks the little one what happened. He responds that a group of crazed Hwan clan members is breaking everything in the camp. The protagonist can't believe it. The little one comments that Annabelle sent him to call for help, and he needs to return immediately. The king quickly heads toward the camp, saying he's on his way. Meanwhile, in the camp, the hunters are trying to defend the area, shouting for everyone to stay together and be careful. Annabelle shouts to conserve their strength and prepare for close combat, as these lunatics are completely ignoring the wooden spears. Agun, up in a tree, wonders what is wrong with them, saying it's as if they feel no pain at all. The group from the Hwan clan advances toward the hunters. Annabelle shouts for everyone not to panic, and that no matter what happens, they must not let them take them to the river, as they would have no chance against them in the water. Infuriated, the Hwan clan charges forward. Annabelle shouts for everyone to be cautious of the attack. The two groups clash. Annabelle realizes the attack has been interrupted and shouts that this is the perfect opportunity. Hwan, with his spear, yells to push them back. Annabelle shouts that the queen's reinforcements have arrived. The queen asks what is happening there. She is surprised to see the Hwan clan and questions if they aren't supposed to live on the southern beaches, wondering how they appeared there suddenly, and noticing they seem a bit strange. Annabelle replies that he doesn't know, but they have been acting like lunatics, and suddenly came out of the southern river, starting to attack them. He comments that it is more appropriate to consider them monsters. The Hwan clan becomes enraged. The hunters shout for everyone to be careful as they are coming. Furious, the Hwan clan charges. Annabelle, along with the sentinels, urges them to advance and send those bastards to hell. A fierce battle begins between the two groups. Annabelle remarks that he will turn them into minced meat. The queen, with her whip wrapped around one of their necks, questions whether he can speak while she chokes him, but realizes that something is wrong. They don't seem to communicate at all. She screams, cursing, and asks what they are doing when suddenly one of them appears behind her, about to strike her with a powerful blow. The protagonist emerges with his axe, blocking the attack and creating a massive impact, questioning how he dares to try to hurt his woman. She feels relieved to see him there. Struggling to withstand the attack, he tells the queen to move away. She understands, and with that, the protagonist manages to repel the attack. He sighs, staring at the creature. He thinks that the creature resisted his blow with full force, equivalent to a strength value of 3. Suddenly, 2 creatures attack him from behind. The queen shouts to warn him. He is shocked, but Tarzan manages to take one down, and Agun hits the other creature in the chest with a spear. They comment that if the creatures want to fight the king, they must first get through them. The protagonist thanks them, saying they did well. He mentions that he will leave those little ones with them, and asks the queen if he can trust her to help deal with the rest, as he needs to focus entirely on the opponent in front of him. The two begin to face off, and the protagonist thinks that until the outcome of this fight is determined, he will be counting on their help. He remarks that he doesn't know what happened to the Hwan clan and, pointing his axe, states that this has nothing to do with them, questioning if they have confused the target of their vengeance. The giant creature ignores him and charges at him. The protagonist wonders if they have lost the ability to communicate, and at the last second, manages to dodge the attack. However, the enraged creature lunges at him again. The protagonist is impressed by the explosive power and quick reflexes, all combined with sharp claws and teeth. Even with his strength and agility exceeding those of an ordinary person multiple times over, he is still just a weakling who barely causes damage against these monsters. And since he is in their territory, surrounded by their people, he cannot use the hidden ability of his axe. Moreover, he doesn't want to use that ability unless absolutely necessary. The creature charges at him with its claws. The protagonist uses his arm to defend himself, and the creature bites him. The king becomes furious and shouts for it to let go of him. Attempting to strike with his axe, the creature easily dodges, tearing a piece from his coat. The protagonist steps back and comments that if it weren't for the protection of the former herd leader's coat, his left hand would have been torn off by those sharp teeth. The creature begins to lick the piece of coat stained with the king's blood, and with that, its eyes change color, as if some kind of infection is taking hold. It starts to become even stronger, and with a tremendous roar, charges at the protagonist with incredible speed. The king realizes it is moving even faster, and at the last second, he manages to dodge. However, the creature manages to grab the coat and starts to shred it with its teeth. The protagonist watches, wondering how it became so fast all of a sudden. If he hadn't let go of the coat, he would be in its place, being chewed up. He notices that the creature has stopped attacking and wonders why, questioning what it is doing. The Hwan clan begins to return to the water. The protagonist wonders if they are leaving and realizes something is wrong, as it only tore off the part of the coat that was stained with his blood. Then, he begins to analyze the battle. As he looks at one of his hunters who has no injuries, he notices that only one creature is attacking him. Meanwhile, another hunter, who has several injuries, is being attacked by a group at the same time. He wonders if it could be because of the smell of blood and comments that he finally understands. They use the scent of the prey's blood to lock onto a target, and that scent makes them even more bloodthirsty and crazed. In this strange state, they are acting based on their primitive instincts, just like sharks go wild at the smell of blood. The protagonist picks up a piece of mud and applies it to the wound on his arm, thinking that as long as they can use this trait, the little one finally arrives at the camp and asks the king if there is anything he can do to help. The protagonist asks him to grab 2 people and 3 piglets from the stable. The little one is surprised to see that it's for the wild boar piglets and questions whether they shouldn't be raised to become food later. The protagonist tells him to just do as he said. The little one understands. The king thinks that the Hwan clan is forcing him to sacrifice 3 precious wild boar piglets, and he will collect that debt later. The protagonist approaches the queen and asks her to take all the injured off the battlefield and move them as far away as possible. While holding a creature with her whip, she understands. Suddenly, the little one and 2 women from the Yellen Clan arrive with the 3 piglets and say to let the piglets run toward the riverbank. The little one scares the wild boar piglets. The king calls to Agu, who is up in a tree. He responds that he will take care of it and starts throwing spears, killing the 3 piglets. The Hwan clan freezes around the small wild boars, and those in the water look toward the shore. Suddenly, they all charge the piglets and begin to devour them. The protagonist takes advantage of this opportunity and calls everyone, instructing them to apply the paralytic drug to the tips of their spears and to make sure to avoid vital points. Everyone understands. Agu notices something and comments to the king that they are acting strangely again. The king is surprised, but the Hwan clan starts writhing in pain. The king is confused by this and questions if the little one poisoned the piglets. He replies that he didn't do anything of the sort. Suddenly, all the creatures fall to the ground. The protagonist tells everyone not to get too close and to stay alert. He wonders what is happening there. Later in the cultivation area, after capturing them, one of the sentries instructs everyone to stay alert, and if these guys make any strange move, they should be knocked out immediately. Suddenly, she notices something unusual. As she approaches the cage, she realizes they are awake, and one of them begs for help. She quickly instructs another guard to inform the king that they have awakened. A while later, someone approaches, and the protagonist asks about the situation. The sentry requests him to come closer as the creatures are asking for water. He asks where the big one is. The sentry responds that they kept him separate. As he approaches the big one, the protagonist sees that he too is asking for water, and after opening a bottle, pours a little over him, and the big one quickly opens his mouth to drink. The big one is confused upon seeing the protagonist, and the king asks if he can understand their words. He replies that he can. The protagonist comments that it's now up to Ayu. She approaches the big one, and as she serves water, asks him to open his mouth and drink as much as he wants, because if it's not enough, she'll fetch more from the river. However, it's a bit far, and it will take some time. The big one mentions that his people also need water and asks for their help. She says it's no problem. Everyone will get enough water. Then she imagines he might be willing to answer some questions now. Indignant, he asks what she's saying, questioning if they attacked his territory just to ask a few questions. She looks at the king, confused, and comments that, though she had heard the Jui clan was a strange group of people, she never expected them to be so bizarre. She asks the big one if he is saying he was attacked by the Jui clan. He is confused and asks if they aren't the Jui clan. She replies that he attacked the wrong clan. They are the novice tribe, and the man behind her is King Chen. The big one remarks he's never heard of them, guessing those damned Jui clan members must have sold them somewhere far away. She sighs and tells him he misunderstood. Ayu explains that they were captured for attacking the novice tribe's territory. He is in disbelief. She continues, explaining they never had any dealings with the Jui clan. He and the Hwan clan attacked them like beasts, without even allowing communication, so they had to detain them temporarily. The big one can't believe it, and thinks she's lying, wondering why he can't remember what she's saying. She asks him to recall what he does remember. The big one says his name is Shito, leader of the Hwan clan. They used to live near the beach, and one day, while fishing, a clan member called him, saying Xian and Hua were fighting again. Smiling, he remarks to let them be, as young people need to fight sometimes. It builds camaraderie. While one punches the other, he yells he will kill him. Another member approaches, crying, saying they took the dodo bird he caught. Shitu asks if it was Sika and the others, and tells him that crying won't help. He needs to learn to fight back, and only when others fear him will they stop taking his things. The young one says it wasn't them, but a group of weirdos. Shito quickly realizes who it was, the Jui clan. Upon reaching the sand, he questions what they are doing there. The Jui clan leader orders them killed, and they attack the Hwan clan. Shitu shouts, asking if they are ambushing him. In the present, he recounts that he was knocked out during the fight, and upon waking, found himself captured by the novice tribe, unable to remember anything that happened since. He doesn't even know how his tribe members are doing now. The protagonist assesses the situation, sighs, and mentions that he visited the Hwan clan's territory not long ago, and no one was left. If he hadn't chosen to spare their lives here, the Hwan clan would be extinct today. Shitu can't believe it, cries out in anguish, and laments for failing to protect any of them. He begins to cry, and suddenly a leaf falls from his body. Ayu picks it up and asks what it is, handing it to the king for a closer look, as it's a plant she has never seen before. The protagonist, upon picking it up, asks the system to identify it: industrial hemp, an herbaceous plant. It has a bitter taste, analgesic properties, and its smoke can induce hallucinations. He wonders if this was the cause of the attack. Later, after capturing them, one of the sentries offers them water and comments not to rush, as there's plenty for everyone, asking them to pass it along. The protagonist reflects while holding a small leaf, remarking that it was just as he thought. All the leaves collected from the Hwan clan were the same: industrial hemp. He recalls that the little one once said the Jui Clan leader gained some kind of divine power, one more like a dark deity. This type of hallucinogenic substance was probably what made the Hwan clan turn against others, with some clever creatures realizing they could avoid inhaling the toxic smoke by entering the water, though ultimately they died of exhaustion. Looking at the captured creatures, he thinks the Jui Clan is extremely troublesome, and these unruly members of the Hwan clan didn't come here by accident. If the Jui Clan intentionally led them here to wreak havoc and leave everyone in a terrible situation or dead, it means the novice tribe has not only been noticed, but also seen as a threat to be faced. Even Shitu, with his immense strength, has become a puppet in others' hands. The strength of the Jui Clan must not be underestimated in any way. The protagonist decides to open the system. Attributes: name, Chen Li. Title, none. Weapon, Pangu's axe. Race, human. Physique, 2. Strength, 3. Intelligence, 1. Agility, 2. Prestige, 0. Technology, 27. Territory, none. He realizes that only 3 strength points might not be enough to face the Jui Clan, and before danger arrives, he needed to increase his strength to the maximum. While observing one of the captured members of the Hwan clan, he thinks that it wasn't just him, but the entire novice tribe was still too weak. Shitu says that if he had noticed those bastards earlier, Yu comments that he was on the brink of a mental breakdown and might not be able to respond anymore. The protagonist states that they didn't have much time to wait for him to calm down, as danger could be surrounding them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Yu, confused, questions if he was referring to the Jui Clan and asks if they had planned this attack, wondering how they did it. The protagonist, holding a leaf, replies that, although it is hard to explain exactly how, he says that they basically controlled the Hwan clan with those leaves, and he didn't know when the next attack would happen or if they would personally participate, since they had very little information about the Jui Clan. Because of this, the novice tribe was completely on the defensive, and that was why they needed Shitu to remember something quickly. The protagonist calls out to him and mentions that he had to stop blaming himself, for even if one inhaled the smoke of that thing just once, no matter how strong they were, it was useless. Holding the leaf, the protagonist hands it to him and asks if it triggers any memories. Shitu starts to smell it, feels a pain in his head, and comments that he remembered the smell, having vaguely sensed it while fighting those bastards, but at that moment, it was mixed with all sorts of strange smells. He just felt it was very strong and unpleasant. The protagonist becomes confused about the many scents and questions if they were using different types of poisonous plants, remarking that he would need to discover the effects of the poisonous herb before planning any counterattack. Shitu, realizing they were going to fight the Jui Clan, becomes desperate and begs to join them, as he would regret it for the rest of his life if he couldn't avenge his brothers. With that, all the other imprisoned members of the Hwan clan cry out, declaring they want revenge for their brothers and ask the king to let them join, saying that as long as they have revenge, they would do anything. The protagonist hesitates and thinks that even though he only needed 4 people to complete the main mission, Shitu says their noses are very sensitive and they could help from a distance by tracking the poisonous herbs, which would certainly aid them. The protagonist remarks that this was the source of his concern, as the Hwan clan was very sensitive to the smell of blood, and if they lost control again, the consequences would be unimaginable. Shitu, indignant, shouts that if it weren't for the poisonous smoke, they would definitely be able to control themselves. The protagonist comments that the opponent was the Jui Clan and questions what would happen if they released the poisonous smoke during the battle. Shitu falls silent, shaken, and says that was not the case. The protagonist explains that he understood the desire for revenge, but with just anger and hatred, nothing would be resolved. He sighs and mentions that he had an alternative but feared they wouldn't agree with the idea. Shitu declares that they are the last survivors of the Hwan clan and that as long as the king can help them achieve their revenge, the life of the Hwan clan is his. The protagonist understands and says that as long as they join the tribe and swear loyalty, he will ensure they get their revenge. But not all of them will have the chance to personally take vengeance. He asks what they think of the idea. Shitu agrees, and the other members of the Hwan clan do as well, eager for revenge. The protagonist looks at Yu, who nods as he departs. Shitu calls out, and the king asks Yu and Windy to let everyone out of the cages, for they were all companions after all. A system window appears saying, "Main mission settlement is complete." He received the mission rewards: attribute points ×3, large material chest ×1, heritage plate ×1. For completing the mission 7 days ahead of the deadline, he received an extra surprise package. Looking at the system, the protagonist feels relieved to have finally completed the mission. Attributes: name, Chen Li. Title, none. Weapon, Pangu's axe. Race, human. Physique, +2. Strength, +3. Intelligence, +1. Agility, +2. Prestige, 0. Technology, 27. Territory, novice tribe, approximately 1 square kilometer. Population, 68. Civilization ranking, Stone Age, level 0. The protagonist sighs, thinking that the most crucial mission is finally complete. Looking at the system window, he decides to allocate all the points to strength. Suddenly, a mysterious energy surrounds him. As he absorbs the energy, the protagonist screams and comments on the surge of power he feels. Exhausted, he collapses to the ground. A system window suddenly appears saying, "Strengthening complete." Looking at the system, he remarks that now, in terms of strength, he should not lose to any human. However, he notices his hair has grown and wonders if that is a side effect. He decides to check the rewards: large material chest, surprise package, and heritage plate. He chooses to open the large material chest. The system announces he obtained metal, 1 ton of hematite. The protagonist is surprised to see it as iron ore and comments that it's an incredible reward, provided he can reach temperatures above 1700 degrees. However, he wonders if this means he could skip the Bronze Age and advance directly, remarking that this is the power of knowledge. Hopefully, the surprise package would contain something even more valuable. He decides to open the package, feeling excited, and saying that the rewards this time were truly fantastic. They were certainly better than the ones he got last time, and now he was even more excited about the heritage plate. Then, he decides to take out the plate, and a huge plaque falls to the ground. A system window appears saying, "Heritage plate, heritage level 1, an era more advanced than the current technology. Heritage content, unknown, requires 10 technology points. Effect, record the product of a given civilization. Devoted worship can yield the product. The level of understanding will depend on the individual's intelligence." The protagonist is puzzled by the civilization product and decides to identify the heritage plate. A mysterious light emanates from the plate, and the system announces that identification was successful. "Congratulations on obtaining the heritage plate, sense of modesty." He comments that this is a crucial step in the civilization's development. However, he no longer needed to worry about mixed baths, as he didn't want anyone witnessing xiao bathing. Overall, they were all very useful items. Now he had to resolve a situation and thinks about dealing with the threat from the Jui Clan. Suddenly, Ayu appears, calling him. He asks if something happened. Stretching her arm, she notices the king is taller, more muscular, and that his hair has also grown. The protagonist acknowledges it and asks what she needs from him. She asks if he needs her to negotiate with the Jui Clan and resolve any misunderstanding. He replies that there is no misunderstanding. They decided to exterminate the novice tribe and are undoubtedly the most troublesome opponents they have faced so far. They might even use tactics to pit them against each other, only to reap the benefits from behind. Ayu grabs his arm and asks what they will do now, admitting she is afraid. Looking at the members of the Yellen Clan, the protagonist comments that the only thing they can do is build defenses, stock up on food, and not provoke them until they are fully prepared, besides hiding their capabilities and waiting for the right moment. He asks if she understands. Ayu struggles to understand what he said and asks how she should organize the 22 people who join them. He replies that for now, she should divide them into 3 groups, each participating in building houses, obtaining food, and setting traps. She wonders what those traps are and questions why they need to make them. He responds that, simply put, traps can be used to protect the territory, like when dozens of Yellen Clan members suddenly attacked their land. He remarks that he didn't want to go through that again. By making different types of traps suited to the terrain, they could avoid repeating past mistakes and, hopefully, capture enemies alive or even wild beasts. He decides to explain the specific methods later, but for now he has an urgent task for her. Ayu is confused. The protagonist explains that with the sudden increase in population, they needed to consider long-term food supply issues. He couldn't just let all that unused meat go to waste. He would teach them how to make dried meat first. Later that day, the members were slicing the meat and laying it out on some tree branches. The protagonist thinks this isn't bad at all, as the newcomers integrated quickly and were also very good at drying meat. Annabelle, cheerful, approaches and says he has arrived. He notices something different about the king and asks if he has gotten stronger, commenting that his hair is longer. The protagonist tells him not to worry about that, as he has a mission for him. Drawing on the ground with a stick, he begins to show and explain the plan, saying he needs him to set traps around the surrounding mountains. The more the better. He has already chosen some people to assist and will personally teach how to set the first traps. However, the most important thing for Annabelle isn't learning how to make the traps, but remembering their locations. Annabelle, feeling lost, comments that this mission doesn't sound exciting at all. The protagonist smacks him on the head with the stick and says that entrusting him with remembering the location of each trap is a sign of trust, and it must be an absolute secret. Besides the king and Annabelle, no one else should know. He asks if Annabelle understands. The protagonist continues, saying that when assigning tasks, he should make sure each person passes through different areas to set the traps, and that no one should know the locations of all the traps in a specific area. Otherwise, if there were a traitor among them, the consequences would be unimaginable. Annabelle becomes anxious. The protagonist says that once all the traps are ready, Annabelle should report their locations. With that, he begins erasing the plan drawn on the ground. Hitting his fist against Annabelle's chest, he tells him not to write anything down, only to memorize it, and asks if he understands. Annabelle, though confused, gets it, and says that even though it's a bit difficult, he will definitely live up to the trust placed in him. The protagonist is relieved and says that's great, telling him to rest because tonight, they will start working under the cover of darkness. Later, in front of the palace, beside Tarzan, the protagonist summons the heritage plate and says he will leave it there for everyone to see as they pass by, and how much they can learn will depend on their own luck. He tells Tarzan he will rest a bit, and that Annabelle and the others will meet him tonight. However, if any other urgent matter comes up, Tarzan should wake him immediately. Tarzan understands. In his room, behind the throne, the protagonist comments that he is exhausted, and after throwing himself onto his bed, he thinks he doesn't know how much time they have. However, there is so much to do. Train soldiers in different units, build defensive structures, organize patrol teams, develop technology, expand the territory. There is a lot of work, and it seems endless. He should cherish this rare moment of rest and regain his strength. Slowly, he falls asleep. Sometime later, he slowly opens his eyes, hearing some conversations. He starts looking around and, upon seeing several women, wonders if it's a banquet. Suddenly, someone approaches and places a hand on the protagonist's shoulder, asking if something is wrong and if that's all he has. Celebrating the banquet, he responds that it isn't, and asks who the women are. One of them introduces herself, saying her name is Xiao Ya, and asks if he drank too much. Another woman says her name is Li Li, and the third responds that she is Ti Dan. Excited, he shouts that he indeed drank too much, and comments that he remembers all of them, saying he's finally back and done with the anxious days living in the wild. He asks to keep the music going, and invites everyone to dance. He starts smoking a cigar. Later, lying in bed with Xiao, while half asleep, he murmurs to keep it rolling. Xiao wakes up and says it's time to work. The protagonist replies that he really can't do this anymore. She responds that she isn't Xiao. He calls her Li Li, but she says that's wrong. He tries again, calling her Tai Dan, but she corrects him again. Then she reveals that she's Annabelle. The protagonist is shocked and wakes up screaming. Annabelle, sitting beside him, asks if something is wrong. The protagonist questions why he is there. Annabelle explains that the king had told him to meet him at night and that he was waiting to wake him. But the king grabbed him and, embarrassed, mentions that the protagonist started flirting with him. The king says it was all a misunderstanding and asks him to leave. Tarzan, standing outside, feels awkward about the situation. Later, at a pit filled with spears, after placing a sledgehammer on the ground, the protagonist remarks that this is a simple spike trap and starts explaining again. Since there would be many monsters to face, for the trap to be effective, its productivity and width needed to be sufficient. They should also cover it with leaves. Once finished, he comments that now they have a trap. Everyone is amazed. He mentions that spike traps can be combined with wire traps he had shown earlier, and the most important thing is knowing how to mix and match. The people from the Yellen Clan are impressed and say he is like a god. The protagonist asks if Agun can teach everyone how to make other traps. Agun is shocked and says he doesn't know any. The king asks if he remembers the moving target used for spear practice last time. That was a perfect trap. It just needed to adjust the trigger mechanism. He explains that if they replaced a wooden log with a net, they would have a net trap and says he'll leave the rest to them, returning after sunrise. Annabelle understands, and as he passes by, the protagonist reminds him not to forget the other mission. Annabelle tells the king to leave that to him. As he leaves, the king hopes he can continue that dream when he returns. Annabelle gathers everyone to explain the details. At dawn, the protagonist is surprised and comments that by now, someone should already be awake and working, wondering why there isn't even a sentry today. As he walks, he wonders if everyone is sick. He decides to knock on a door, but someone yells at him to get lost, calling him an intruder. Peeking in, he questions what's going on. The women are surprised to see it's the king. Shosho comments that their clothes are a bit too revealing, so they're hesitant to come out. Observing them, he wonders if this is the effect of the heritage plate, sense of modesty. As he leaves, he comments that they have until midday to make new clothes, and if they don't come out by then, they shouldn't blame him for being strict. Walking up to the plate, he says he didn't expect that little thing to have such power, when suddenly someone calls him. Annabelle approaches and says he needs to see something. Holding 2 stones, he explains that while digging traps, they found stones that ignite, and asks the king to take a look. He explains that when these 2 stones are rubbed together hard, they produce sparks. The protagonist, confused, comments that this is nitro, and that Annabelle has made a brilliant discovery. With this, they would have endless possibilities. Later, in the mountains, Annabelle comes running back to show the king where they found them, mentioning they also dug some up. Looking at the pit, the protagonist, thinking, realizes there weren't many of them, but he had already expected that, since after all, this wasn't a dry and arid alkaline saline land, and if it wasn't formed naturally, there was only one possibility. He asks Annabelle why he doesn't take a look at what's inside the soil. Annabelle understands, kneels down, grabs a few things, and comments that the soil there is easy to dig and seems to have something in it that doesn't feel like rocks. He decides to taste it and comments that it's dung. The protagonist realizes he is right and remarks that there is probably a large manure pit underneath. Annabelle starts vomiting. The protagonist, pondering, wonders if another group of primitive people had once lived there, and if they had reached a cultural level where they had something similar to a bathroom, or if it might have been the former home of the Jui Clan. He instructs them to collect the nitros and then cover the pit again, leaving no trace. Also, they should set up more traps nearby, and with that, they needed to build watchtowers on high ground. The protagonist asks for people to keep watch in shifts. Annabelle, desperate, questions what a tower and watch are. The protagonist says he needs to leave. 4 days later, while walking through the tribe, the king remarks that this is good because everyone has a home to live in, and that's the first step toward happiness. Tarzan, who is accompanying him, asks what he means. He explains it's simple. By ensuring food, clothing, and shelter for the people, the tribe's foundation is solidified. Suddenly, a muscular woman notices the king and interrupts, shouting that he is there. He is startled to see her and tries to run as she charges at him with speed. The protagonist shouts for Tarzan to stop her. Suddenly, she leaps onto him as he calls for help, and the two crash into a house, creating a massive explosion. Tarzan is left confused, not understanding what happened. Desperate, he approaches and asks if the king is okay, while the muscular woman hugs him. The protagonist, stammering, says he is fine. Tarzan asks her to let him go, as she might kill the king. She starts squeezing him, causing him to cough up blood. The muscular woman shouts that they just built the houses, and he cannot die now. Tarzan becomes desperate. Later, the protagonist comments that the fun is over, and asks about the houses that are finished. She replies that they built 2 rows of wooden houses, totaling 10, enough for 50 people. Everything was on schedule, and at this rate, everyone would have a wooden house in 2 days. The protagonist places a hand on her head, praises her, and asks her to keep it up, saying he'll be back to check in a few days. He mentions she should be less reckless, and as punishment, she has to fix the house. She agrees and waves at him. The protagonist says he needs to check on the reserves and food supplies. Tarzan, looking at the spot where the muscular woman had hugged him tightly, asks if he is really okay. He responds that he is perfectly fine. Later, by the riverbank, Shito catches a fish with his spear and shouts that he caught another big one. The other members are impressed and say he is amazing. While Ayu hangs the caught fish, Shosho tells the children not to run around. The protagonist, observing them, remarks that compared to digging traps and building houses, the Yellen Clan is indeed better suited for fishing in the river. And ever since they started helping, the tribe's variety and quantity of food had noticeably increased. Tarzan comments that it's all thanks to the king, and that he is the one leading the novice tribe to live such a good life. He says the king shouldn't worry at all because with him around, they will be safe even if they are attacked. The protagonist, with a serious look, comments that he hopes Tarzan doesn't regret the methods he used to subdue the Yellen and Hwan clans, as they still have a long way to go. Tarzan, with a slight smile, says that the king shouldn't have such doubts because if they follow him, it's because they trust his decisions. Additionally, he was sure no one would regret the king's methods, as everyone knew it was the law of the jungle. Large and small clans were devouring and destroying each other daily. Even after conquering a clan, the king only gained scraps, yet they still managed to form alliances with these clans. The protagonist feels relieved and comments that Tarzan seems to have a clear understanding of him. Tarzan looks confused. The protagonist calls him and mentions it's time to inspect and approve the positions in the border defense zone. Looking at the Hwan clan, he comments that they have a surprise to show, imagining slick fishmen. Later, as the sun sets over the forest, Annabelle climbs the mountain. The protagonist tells him to come down because he has something to discuss. Annabelle responds that he's already coming down. The king asks how the construction of the traps and towers is going. Annabelle replies that they did as ordered, already building the towers in the south, west, and north directions. However, there's a problem. The protagonist asks what the problem is. Annabelle explains that after assigning 6 people to each tower to keep watch, there weren't enough people left for the other tasks. To organize the teams, they had to start earlier, then climb the mountain to work on both tasks until nightfall. The protagonist comments that, unfortunately, they still lack manpower, and today he and Tarzan will climb the mountain with him to help. Annabelle says there's no need for that. The king responds that it's a special case, as they are racing against time and all help is welcome. He thinks that if the Jui clan once lived there, they might be more familiar with the terrain than they are, and if they took advantage of the novice tribe's lack of preparation, he would launch his large-scale secret attack against them to destroy them. There's no time to lose. They have to move forward. Later that night, the protagonist and the fishmen are preparing the traps. Someone warns them to be careful and says they need to tighten things a bit more, while another comments that they still need wooden stakes. The protagonist looks at the watchtower on the southern mountain and feels a bad premonition. While setting the trap, he thinks it's not good to dwell on bad things. Suddenly, they hear a scream and realize it came from the south. The watchtower is signaling. The protagonist shouts that the southern mountain watchtower is under attack and calls everyone to move there. While running, the protagonist, with speed superior to the others, goes ahead holding a spear. He thinks that, even with the knowledge of the trap's locations and the 2-point agility bonus, it would still take at least 5 minutes to reach the southern mountain, hoping nothing happens in those 5 minutes. Agu, on the tower, is on alert, and looking at the forest, thinks that the triggered traps are too close to the tribe, wondering if the enemies have infiltrated that deeply. With a giant leap, he decides to check and considers that there may be other enemies who noticed the bonfire and could be advancing toward them. In owl form, he lands on the ground holding his spears, thinking he needs to find them before they find him. As he advances toward the trap, he notices something and realizes it's indeed an ambush. He shouts, asking if they're planning a sneak attack, but remembers not to make noise and throws his spear toward a bush. However, he notices it didn't work. Suddenly, someone throws a spear at him. Agun manages to block it, but the enemy attacks with incredible speed. He shouts that they are too fast and closes his eyes, bracing for the attack. However, the axe stops just before hitting him. Confused, he opens his eyes and sees it's the king, questioning why he's there. The protagonist says there's no time to explain and asks if he knows where the triggered traps are. Agun responds that he does, and that he was the one who lit the bonfire on the watchtower. The traps were triggered just ahead. The king comments that he did a great job, and that he would go ahead first. He asks Agun to wait for those coming via the safe route and guide them to the location. Agun understands and shouts that there might be more than one enemy, asking the king to be careful. Later that night, the trap had caught something. The protagonist, hiding behind a nearby tree, thinks he can't sense any other presence, and since the place is quiet, it doesn't seem like they caught a wild beast. And this person isn't calling for help, which makes him wonder if she might be alone or unconscious. He sighs, and stepping out from behind the tree, thinks it's best to take a look. Holding his axe, he is confused to see that it is the queen, and asks what she is doing there, questioning if she shouldn't be recovering from her injuries. The queen, indignant, asks if he's just going to stand there asking questions. The protagonist enjoys the scene and comments that this is quite rare. She becomes enraged and shouts that she'll kick him in the groin. He grabs her foot and remarks that she'd do that with those beautiful feet. She screams at him to let go, but he starts caressing her feet slowly. She begins to feel aroused and yells at him to stop, saying she's getting angry, and asks him to put her down. The king laughs and agrees. Suddenly, they hear someone saying the king must be up ahead, urging everyone to hurry. The queen, furious, says that if anyone sees her like this, she swears she'll kill them all to keep the secret. He responds that he'll handle it quickly, untying the trap's rope. He shouts for everyone to stay where they are and not come any closer, as the situation there is dangerous, and they might die if they approach. The members are confused by the situation. Annabelle wonders if the king fell into a trap and asks if they should rush over to save him. Agun says he doesn't know, but from the way he spoke, it didn't seem like he was hurt, and wonders if there's something he doesn't want them to see. Annabelle speculates that he already knows. The king must be taking a dump after the battle, since even Annabelle hasn't been able to relieve himself in front of everyone these days and had to go alone. And the women too. They avoided the men when they needed to bathe or do their business. He realizes that everyone seems to have changed a bit, though he can't pinpoint exactly what. The queen is finally on the ground. The king starts laughing and says he didn't expect her, of all people, to fall into the trap. At least now they know the traps work. She says she didn't expect him to know so many strange tricks. He comments that it's his fault for not warning her earlier, and asks what brought her out there in the middle of the night. She says she overheard some conversations from the Yellen Clan at night. She recalls a conversation where the fishmen were whispering, and one of them mentioned how nice it would be to catch fish, shrimp, or shellfish by the sea. Eating them would definitely give them more energy to work. The protagonist thinks and suggests it's probably due to the need for salt consumption. She remembers another one mentioning that the path to the beach was blocked by a fierce pack of hyenas, making fishing too risky when there was a chance of being devoured. She says she then decided to look for a new and safe route during the night. The protagonist comments that he's traveled those paths many times and that there hadn't been hyenas there 5 days ago. It seems someone from the Yellen Clan slipped away in the past few days. She looks confused and asks if there's something wrong with them, questioning if they should be executed. He replies that's not what he meant. He was thinking about security gaps they hadn't noticed before. Maybe they should organize a patrol, but it's important to clear the path to the beach. It would be better to establish a new outpost there. Fish and shrimp are secondary, but they definitely need the dodo birds and their eggs. Additionally, they could open a salt drying field. He declares that it's decided. Starting tomorrow, they'll deal with the ignorant hyenas. The queen offers to handle the patrols and secret sentries for him. As for dealing with the hyenas and expanding the territory, she suggests he reconsider. The protagonist is surprised and asks if she's worried about him. Embarrassed, she slaps him and tells him not to delude himself. She's only worried that, with so few people spread out for protection, managing 2 territories could be reckless. Besides, the beach has already been attacked by the Jui Clan once. The king places his hands on her shoulders to comfort her. The queen continues, saying, "What if they attack again?" The protagonist explains that the reason is precisely because they've attacked the beach before, making it relatively safe for now. The novice tribe's camp, the beach outpost, and the Jui Clan in the southeastern mountain form a triangle, and as long as they ensure a smooth exchange of goods and information between the beach outpost and the tribe's camp, they can support each other. After all, the Jui Clan are dangerous people who use poisonous smoke and the like. Living all together in one place makes the novice tribe easy targets. While receiving a massage from the king, the queen says she has no idea what he's talking about, but since he's decided, she'll do things his way. The other hunters waiting for the king end up dozing off from waiting so long. Annabelle wonders if the king is still not done and remarks that he really is an incredible guy. Sometime later, under the moonlight, the protagonist and a group of fishmen are walking through the forest. Shitu asks one of the fishmen if he's sure he found hyenas on this path and wonders why there's no scent of blood here. Pushing through a bush, the fishman says this is the place and they must be just ahead, as he saw several of them 2 days ago. Suddenly, one of the bushes rustles, and a massive, bloodthirsty hyena leaps at the fishman, who falls to the ground in fear. Shitu quickly charges at it and yells if it's asking to die, punching it and sending it flying toward a tree. Shitu growls at it, and soon, a huge pack of hyenas surrounds him. Tarzan urges the king to be careful. The protagonist comments that there's no need to worry, as the Yellen Clan is no longer an enemy, and dealing with these wild dogs is no problem. Shitu, clenching his fists as he stares at the hyenas, shouts for the king to handle the group on the left. Taking down several hyenas with his strength, he yells for the others to leave the right side to him. The protagonist, seeing the hyenas being defeated so easily, remarks that there's nothing worth mentioning. With that, some hyenas rush toward him, but Shitu and another fishman protect him, defeating the hyenas with their claws. The king thinks this is a great opportunity to see what the Yellen Clan is capable of. Suddenly, a hyena attacks him from behind, but the protagonist quickly grabs it by the neck with one hand. The hyena cries out in pain, and he comments that it was unlucky to choose him out of everyone to attack. With that, he defeats it. A while later, they manage to drive the hyena pack away. Shitu complains that it wasn't satisfying enough. The protagonist tells him to forget about it and focus on the next task. Shitu agrees and says it's just ahead, at his old home. The king instructs everyone to be careful. Finally, they arrive at the beach. The protagonist asks if everyone sees the cliff. That's where they'll build the outpost. It needs to be near the cliff and big enough to shelter 20 people. The watchtower will be above the cliff, and after building that, they'll also set up a small salt evaporation field near the outpost. Shitu understands. The king says he'll send people to help as soon as he returns, but they only have 4 days to complete the construction. He sighs, thinking to himself, wondering why he feels like a foreman inspecting a construction site and pushing a tight deadline. But in this land, he's the one who will be doing the heavy lifting. The protagonist says that, for now, that's all, and if there's an emergency, they should immediately light the bonfire and signal for help from the camp. She too confirms. 3 days later, inside the palace, the protagonist is testing a bow and comments that it's not bad at all. Suddenly, a system window appears, announcing that he has invented the wooden bow, technology +5. He remarks that the leather catgut made from bullhide works well, but it requires a lot of effort to become skilled. Additionally, the wood lacks some resilience, and they'll need to find better substitutes in the future. Suddenly, someone outside mentions that the little one is back and has something to report to the king. The protagonist asks Yu to bring him into the palace. With that, the door opens and the two enter. The protagonist asks how it went and if he found any human tribes to ally with or conquer in the north. The little one says he traveled north for another day and didn't find any signs of anyone. He only found a lake and a snow-covered mountain, and it seemed like some kind of creature was living in the lake. However, before he could see clearly, the creature sank into the lake and disappeared. Just beyond was the snow-covered mountain, so he didn't dare to continue and decided to return. The protagonist, pleased, says he did very well, but he didn't expect the little one to be more afraid of the snowy mountains than of the monster in the water. The little one begins to tremble when he remembers the snowy mountains and says they were very scary, and surely the king has heard about them. The protagonist is surprised and asks what he's talking about. Yu hugs him and says she's scared. The king asks why they are so afraid of the snowy mountains. She explains that the terrifying part isn't the snowy mountains, but what hides behind them. The protagonist is confused, wondering what she means. She continues, saying that a giant lives there. The king reassures them, saying they don't need to be afraid. The little one, terrified, says that just thinking about it makes his legs go weak. Suddenly, a system window appears, saying that he has triggered a chain side quest. Giant. Progress. Phase 1. Objective: observe a giant with his own eyes. Time limit: none. Reward: attribute point x1. It asks if he accepts the quest. The protagonist is surprised and thinks that an attribute point just for observing a giant, he had to risk his life to drive away a saber-tooth tiger for 2 points, and the giant was just a big guy he only needed to look at from afar. It shouldn't be dangerous. However, on the other hand, if the giants have a civilization, maybe they could become allies, but he needs to be cautious. If things go wrong, it could lead to the novice tribe's destruction. Still, this exploration and diplomatic mission couldn't be left to the little one, and Yu. The protagonist tells the little one to rest. The banquet will be in 2 days, and he can relax and have fun. The little one thanks him and says he's leaving. Yu comments that the little one gets nervous like that sometimes and asks the king not to mind. The protagonist says it might not be nerves. The little one's danger perception far exceeds that of everyone else, making him sensitive to certain things. That's why he can explore the world freely while staying safe. Suddenly, he asks how the preparations for the ceremony are going. Yu replies that everything is ready. He comments that's great, and asks her to prepare the necessary items for 4 people to travel, as he plans to take a few people with him on a small expedition. She asks if he is going personally and expresses concern, saying it's very dangerous. He responds that it's just an exploration in a nearby area and she doesn't need to worry. He asks her to prepare some food, water bottles, and warm clothes, and to thank Shosho for the great work she did on the clothes. She comments that it was the king's idea, and the useless cowhides now have a purpose. She asks when he plans to leave. He replies that since the ceremony is in 2 days, he will leave the following day after the banquet. 2 days later, the protagonist is testing a shield and says that it will work very well. Because of the hardwood and cowhide, the shield is sturdy yet lightweight. He comments that it took 2 days of work, but it was worth it. A system window appears, stating that he successfully invented the wooden shield. Current technology points: 62. Looking at the equipment, the protagonist says that now everyone could upgrade their gear as quickly as possible. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door. He invites them in. Yu, cheerful and holding some clothes, comments that it's time and that he should put them on. He understands. Later at the ceremony, as the king walks, Annabelle and Agun throw flower petals over him while the people congratulate him. The protagonist is pleased with the ceremony, and as he walks toward the queen, the crowd looks on in admiration. He wonders, thinking, if this is really just a wedding. In his past life, he worked so hard just to make a living, and as he passes by his friends, he continues to think that now he has his own tribe, his own people, and a wife, and although it all feels like a dream come true, in this world, he has a sense of belonging. Taking the queen's hand, he says that in the future, When he's not around, the novice tribe will be in her hands. He shouts that from this day forward, Xiao is the queen of the novice tribe. Everyone cheers, celebrating that they now have a queen. The two prepare to kiss. Meanwhile, a muscular woman in the crowd laments, not wanting the king to be taken by someone else, but admits that the scene is truly touching. That night, around the bonfire, the people bid farewell to the king. He sighs and remarks that, fortunately, nothing went wrong. Ah Yu, excited, says that the queen is waiting for him in the palace and that he should go to her immediately. The protagonist thinks for a moment and, with a mischievous expression, gets excited about the idea of her waiting for him in the palace, imagining her dominating him with her whip, telling him to feel her love as she strikes him with it. In front of the palace, he wonders if something even more thrilling awaits. Opening the door, he announces his arrival. Seeing her sitting on the throne with an intimidating look, he wonders what's happening. The queen stares at him, and he, thinking, feels fearful of the tense atmosphere, wondering if someone is about to die. She says she will give him a chance to explain himself. He is confused, unsure of what she means. She stands and approaches him, holding her whip, asking if he's going to keep pretending. He comments that it's their wedding night and asks if she could be gentler. Terrified, he admits he shouldn't have upgraded her whip. She remarks that he's leaving on a journey right after the ceremony and asks if he's in such a hurry to abandon her. The protagonist is relieved to realize that's all it is and says she scared him. He explains that she misunderstood and asks to let him clarify. The protagonist begins to explain his plan. She asks if his plan is to convince the giants to join the novice tribe to fight against the Jui Clan. The protagonist says he's not entirely sure about that, and just to be safe, he wants to take 3 more people with him. He adds that the true purpose of the trip must remain secret, although he doesn't quite know why Ah Yu and the little one seem so frightened by the giants. The queen asks if it wouldn't be better if she accompanied him. He replies that it's not necessary because she needs to stay with the tribe, and besides, holding a weapon, he says she has more important things to do. She asks what he's holding. He explains that it's a stone sling, and that he'll demonstrate how to use it later. He asks her to train a team of stone throwers until he returns. A while later, the protagonist and a small group were walking through the forest while he sang a song. Looking back, he notices that Ah Yin seems annoyed, and thinks she's deliberately walking behind him, wondering if she's waiting for another chance to stab him in the back. He considers that it doesn't matter, since it was a request from the queen. He recalls massaging Ah Yin's feet, and remarks that her feet were very soft, wondering how that's possible given that she always walks barefoot. She tells him to stop teasing her, and since he wanted to take 3 people with him, asks why he doesn't choose from the Yellen Clan or the Hwan Clan. He explains that he plans to take Shitu, having witnessed his combat skills firsthand, and that the beach outpost will temporarily be under Annibal's responsibility. He reasons that bringing Shitu along will prevent any issues with the newly joined Hwan Clan while he's away. The queen mentions that it doesn't matter whom he chose, but he should take Ah Yin with him. He is confused by her request. She responds that this isn't up for negotiation. Ah Yin is the fiercest and bravest warrior beside her, and her wounds have already healed. Only then will she feel at ease. Pinching the king's cheeks, she says she already taught Ah Yin a harsh lesson for the last incident, so he can rest easy. In the present, he wonders how he could feel at ease with her glaring like that, and if something goes wrong again, he'll have to rely on Agun to save him. Agun mentions feeling as though something is watching them and asks if it's just his imagination. The protagonist, thinking, says it's not Agun's imagination. The threat is right behind them. Agun gets excited, pointing at something. Shitu asks if the king knew there was a lake up ahead. The protagonist replies that the little one mentioned the lake. Shitu laughs and says that he probably saw the big creature too. The protagonist is surprised, wondering if Shitu knows about the lake monster. Shitu explains that when he was a child, he saw the monster swallow a whole leopard in one gulp. Holding his water bottle, he says he was very young then and was greatly impressed, adding that if they're lucky, maybe they'll get to have a good fight with the monster this time. Watching him drink water, the protagonist comments that encountering such a monster doesn't sound like luck at all. Monsters like lake creatures don't interest him much. He'd be more intrigued by something more formidable, like a giant, for example. Hearing the king mention a giant, Agun panics and says no, that it's better not to wish for something like that. The protagonist says he was just talking and asks if giants really exist. Agun begins trembling and reveals that, before meeting the king, they were originally a tribe of over 30 people. But one day, they encountered a giant, and the tribe was too powerless to resist, scattering in all directions. Most of the people were eaten alive, and even though it happened when he was very young, no one who survived that day will ever forget the terrifying scene. The protagonist thinks he finally understands, and that explains why the little one and the others tremble at the mere mention of giants. Shitu warns the group not to eat those fruits, mentioning that when he ate them as a kid, the consequences were severe. The protagonist is confused and decides to check what it is. A system window appears saying, Croton tiglium, a spicy, laxative, and poisonous herbaceous plant. The protagonist imagines what Shitu must have gone through after eating the fruit, thinking it must have been hell. He comments that the plants around here seem unfamiliar and wonders if there are any useful ones in the area. He scans everything and identifies Lysimachia christinae from the primrose family. Relieves heat, detoxifies, has diuretic effects and improves blood circulation. Agramonia pilosa from the rose family has hemostatic, detoxifying, and insecticidal effects. Artemisia from the daisy family stops bleeding, reduces inflammation, and has anti-allergic properties. Honeysuckle from the honeysuckle family reduces fever, suppresses cough, and has detoxifying effects. The protagonist is delighted, starts collecting each plant, and remarks that this place is a medicinal garden. Upon spotting a flower, he notices it looks somewhat familiar, and as the system identifies it, he wonders if it could be Panicum miliaceum from the Poaceae family, an annual cereal grass, also known as proso millet or broomcorn millet. It is the yellow grain among the 5 cereals. He gets excited and comments that he found grain seeds. Ah Yin is puzzled by the king's reaction. The protagonist is surprised by the system window that appears, stating, Chain side quest, agriculture. Objective, plant more than one type of grain in bulk and harvest them successfully. Time limit, 180 days. Reward, Heritage Plate X2. The protagonist says it looks like they can finally enter the age of agriculture, and that's not bad at all. Once they find clay, they can cook, make herbal medicines, and much more. As he prepares to collect the grains, he realizes they're not ripe, so they'll have to return later to harvest. Thinking, he mentions that he's had a strange feeling for a while, and looking at Ah Yin, he realizes it's not her hostility. Ah Gun, pointing, asks them to look over there. The protagonist, surprised, asks what's happening. He looks at one of the plants, Rami, from the nettle family. Its fibers are strong and can be used to make ropes, fabrics, or paper. He remarks that Ah Gun found something great and says that when they return, they should cut some to bring back, so the tribe will have more varied clothing from now on. Ah Gun says he wasn't talking about those strange things and pointing, asks the king to look quickly over there. Suddenly there's rustling behind the bushes and a hyena slowly emerges, followed by a pack of hyenas. Ah Gun mentions that they've been followed for a while, and the feeling of being watched was because of them. The protagonist is surprised to see hyenas again, and summoning his axe, comments that they've probably come seeking revenge against him and Shitu. The hyenas, enraged, start growling. Pointing his axe, the king says that since that's the case, he can't let them get away and orders everyone to kill them all. Shitu and Ah Yin charge at the hyenas. Suddenly, 2 hyenas attack Shitu, who easily grabs them and comments that this time they got themselves into trouble. He slams them together with force. Ah Yin, wielding her bone knives, slices one hyena but more attack her. She is taken aback. Suddenly 2 hyenas crash into the others. Shitu had thrown them and comments that it felt satisfying. Smiling, he says she doesn't need to thank him, but he notices the hyenas are fleeing and says it's a pity. The protagonist declares that this time, they'll finish off the hyenas once and for all because he doesn't want to keep getting ambushed. They charge at the hyenas, and as the hyenas try to escape, the protagonist pursues them, leaping over a log. He thinks that with only 2 agility points, he can barely keep up, and maybe it's unwise to continue chasing. Suddenly, he hears someone screaming. He looks back. Ah Yin has been captured by a huge carnivorous plant, about to devour her. The protagonist wonders what it is. A system window appears, stating, Crimson King Flower, a large herbaceous plant that secretes corrosive mucus from its center, disturbing the surrounding ecological environment. It actively attacks nearby animals and consumes them. He wonders if it's a carnivorous plant. Thinking, he questions whether the oily substances around it are corrosive mucus. Humanoid saber-tooth tigers, giant bulls, and now this carnivorous flower. They're straying further from his understanding of the primitive era. Ah Yin screams at the plant to let her go. She accidentally drops her bone knife toward the plant. The knife, upon hitting the plant's center, begins to dissolve. Ah Yin is terrified. The king can't believe what he's seeing, and neither can Shitu and Ah Gun. The protagonist yells at them, asking why they're just standing there and urges them to hurry and save Ah Yin. Ah Gun, hesitantly, says that it's not that they refuse to help her, but they too were caught by the creature. The king laments as the plant takes advantage and begins wrapping around his leg. Quickly, he uses his axe to cut one of the plant's tentacles. He leaps toward Yin and shouts for her to hold on as he's coming for her. She screams for him to forget about her and save the others. Suddenly, the plant releases her, causing her to fall. She shouts for them to run. The king tries to save her as she's being swallowed by the plant, but the tentacles start attacking him. He begins chopping at them with his axe and shouts for them to forget about him. Suddenly, 2 hyenas appear behind him. As he thinks that he at least needs to save Shitu and Agun, the hyenas are about to bite him, but 2 bottles hit them squarely on the jaws. Shitu, who had thrown them, tells the king not to come closer, as it was a trap set by the hyenas. Shitu and Agun, trapped by the plant's tentacles, struggle to fend off the hyenas' attacks. Shitu shouts for the king to flee, saying they will hold them off as long as they can. The protagonist starts cutting through the plant's tentacles and realizes that the hyenas are fast, using their speed to bring them to this place. While defending himself, he thinks he should have noticed something was wrong with all the dead trees around, but then he realizes something and decides to take a gamble. He says that if it were before, he'd have no options. Holding a stone, he thinks that now he has nitro, so he throws it at a dead tree, declaring that, whether it's plants or animals, there's no creature that can't be dealt with by a good barbecue. Using his axe, he strikes the stone, creating a fire, and tells everyone to burn everything. He then rushes at the plant, delivering several blows, and shouts for it to spit out Yin. The plant spits her out, and she falls to the ground. The protagonist catches her in his arms and asks if she's okay and if she can move, as time is running out, and Shitu and Agun still need help to break free. She starts to regain consciousness. The king says he'll help the others, but first needs to find some clothes for her. After giving Yin his coat, they begin to escape along a path of fire created by the protagonist with his bow. He tells everyone to keep running. He hits one of the dead trees with a fire arrow and thinks that now he doesn't have to worry about the hyenas lurking nearby. While fleeing, he notices water up ahead and tells everyone to run toward the lake because once they jump into the water, they'll be safe. Suddenly, a hyena appears behind Yin, ready to bite her. The protagonist notices and shouts for her to be careful. The hyena bites down on the coat. Yin reaches out for help. The protagonist grabs her hand and pulls her, swapping places. The hyena bites down hard on the coat, tearing it and knocking the protagonist down, but he manages to avoid the bite with his arm. Yin watches as the hyena is about to bite the king. Shitu and Agun are desperate. The protagonist tries to fend it off and shouts for them to run because the fire is spreading quickly, and he'll be right behind them. He thinks the hyena must be on its last legs and just needs to tire it out before the fire reaches them. Suddenly, a small twig strikes the hyena's neck. The protagonist is confused and, looking back, sees Yin with the bow, realizing her hidden talent, archery. He is puzzled and asks if she knows how to use a bow. She replies that she learned by watching him earlier and says she twisted her ankle, has no strength left and can't escape, so they should leave her. The protagonist, holding her, questions what nonsense she's talking about. He lifts her onto his back and starts running away from the fire, shouting that they'll escape together. Shitu, carrying Agun on his back as well, says they need to hurry because there's not much time. They begin running through the burning logs. Shitu says that if Agun wants to make it to the lake, he still has the strength to throw him. Agun responds that it's unnecessary, adding that they both already look like slabs of meat anyway. The protagonist keeps running toward the lake. Yin says that she actually planned to use this chance to get rid of the king and questions if he was the one who orchestrated the attack of the black cows. The protagonist asks why she thinks that. She explains that she knew he wouldn't admit it, but on that day she noticed some of the cows were already wounded. However, their weapons couldn't pierce the cows' tough hide, so she wonders who hurt them, especially since his people seemed particularly skilled at dealing with the cows, which increased her suspicion. But she knew these suspicions wouldn't convince the queen, so she proceeded with the assassination attempt. She holds a knife to his neck and questions that if she attacked now, he wouldn't be able to resist, or he could drop her and get rid of this problem once and for all. The protagonist asks her to hold on, as they were almost there, and she could deal with him however she wanted afterward. She's confused and says she'll let it go for now, but will be keeping an eye on him, and if he ever betrays the queen or the Yellen Clan, she will kill him. The protagonist understands and says so be it. She tells him he is too stubborn and questions if he won't admit it, and asks him to remember her words. Suddenly, they all jump into the lake. Shitu is relieved and says they made it. Looking at the fire, he comments that they almost became roasted back there, and that, luckily, they managed to escape. The protagonist thinks that with 2 members of the group unable to move, they will have to give up on finding the giants for now. He suggests they return to the place where they found the garden, as they need some herbs. She too understands. Later, in the forest, someone is applying a type of ointment to their leg, and Ah-gun starts stretching his legs strangely, saying he doesn't feel any pain anymore. Ah-yin is confused by what she sees. The protagonist asks the two to rest while he and Shito gather some more rami. Later, while collecting the rami, the king comments on the strong medicinal properties of these plants. Shito smells something strange and wonders how he can still smell the hyenas, questioning if the scent clung to him during the fight. The protagonist summons his axe, looks through the bushes and says that's not necessarily the case. He is surprised to find something among the bushes, hyena pups. Picking one up, he realizes that the hyenas weren't after them for revenge. They were just protecting their young from threats. Suddenly, a system window appears, stating that he discovered hyena pups and triggered a side quest. Tame Beast 2. Objective: tame the hyenas to become hunting dogs. Time limit: none. Reward: small supply chest X1, hunting weapon X1. It asks if he accepts. The protagonist is surprised to have triggered another side quest. Delighted by the pups, he accepts the quest. Then, they decide to leave. As they walk, they hear a loud roar and wonder what the noise is. The protagonist comments that they couldn't be that unlucky. A huge beast emerges from between the trees with sharp claws, roaring at them. Ah-gun panics and exclaims that this is bad, shouting that it's a man-eating bear. The protagonist, holding the plants, realizes the bear is coming toward them, and with 2 injured people, they definitely won't be able to run away. He drops the plants on the ground and says the 3 should circle around while he keeps the bear busy. Shito hesitates, but the protagonist says it's no time to argue. Facing the bear, he tells them they would only get in the way and that they have one chance, so they must follow his orders. He summons his axe and tells Shito to take everyone to safety. Shito understands. The protagonist charges at the bear and shouts for them to go. They start running as Shito leads them. The king remarks that it's now just him and the big guy, and with a leap, he yells, ready to strike the bear with his axe. However, the enraged giant manages to hit him first. Shito, looking back, grows concerned for the king and asks Ah-gun and Ah-yin to take the cubs, saying he will go help the king. Ah-gun advises him not to rush, as he has witnessed the king's strength firsthand and believes an opponent of that level won't be able to defeat him. He adds that if they stayed with the protagonist, they would only hinder his movements. Meanwhile, in the battle, the king's axe clashes with the bear's sharp claws. Ah-gun continues, saying it's better to just follow his orders. The protagonist, crouched, notices they manage to escape, and gripping his axe, remarks that with this last blow, he has the bear's full attention. He stands up and starts to run, thinking he only needs to lure the brute and escape. Up in the trees, he begins cursing at the bear. Enraged, the bear charges at him while the small group flees into the forest. Suddenly, a huge explosion occurs. The bear is tearing through everything in its path. The protagonist, hiding behind a tree, thinks the others must be far away by now, and it's time to abandon the big guy and go back. Out of nowhere, a creature appears behind him. The protagonist notices, and seeing the creature leap toward him, manages to dodge just in time. Looking at the silhouette against a smoky backdrop, he wonders what the hell it could be and if it's a giant rat. He realizes something, and upon seeing the saber-tooth tiger, asks if it's an old friend. The tiger seems confused by the protagonist's reaction. The king says that only that dumb look and the burn scar over the left eye could be his. Suddenly, as the two stand there, the enraged bear catches up to them. The protagonist thinks he made a mistake, and surrounded by the wild beasts, he believes there's no way to match their speed or strength and wonders if he should use Pangu's power. However, once used, he would be weak for quite some time and could pass out for days. Even if he didn't die, he might be attacked by the Jui Clan while weakened. The tiger starts walking with a bloodthirsty look, and the enraged bear begins growling. Suddenly, the two beasts leap toward him. The protagonist shouts, questioning why they don't fight each other instead of going after him. Suddenly, a system window appears, alerting, extreme danger detected, emergency escape mode activated. Temporarily gain 20 agility points and convert strength into physique for 600 seconds. When the state ends, 33% of the 3 main attributes will be permanently reduced. He's bewildered by the sensation and leaps upward, causing the two beasts to crash into each other. With extreme agility, he manages to hide behind a tree, observing the two beasts. He comments that this lightness and explosive speed are unbelievable. However, the two beasts find him and charge at him again. The protagonist shouts, questioning if they're still after him and why they aren't fighting each other. He starts running desperately and wonders if they won't give up, thinking they shouldn't push their luck. As he dashes through the forest, a system window appears. Strength 0, Physique 8, Agility 22, Countdown 325 seconds, Temporary. Looking back, he realizes he finally managed to shake them off and remarks that this emergency escape mode is amazing, but the cost is very high. Gazing at the snowy mountain, he says he ran all the way there and might as well use the remaining time to search for the giants. Walking on the snow, he notes he's covered a good distance in one go, and if not for the temporary boost, he would have exhausted himself in this deep snow. A system window appears. Count, 1,425. Nearing the top of a mountain, he says he's almost there. Once he reaches it, he notices something and is stunned to see an ice giant and a captured Tyrannosaurus Rex. He says that this was the legendary giant, and is impressed by its size. The system notifies him, "You discovered the giant, completing a part of the sequence mission Giant. Attribute point +1. He needed to allocate the point. Automatically, he accepts the mission Giant Part 2. Sequence mission Part 2, launch an attack on the giant. Reward, attribute points ×10. Time limit, none. He is terrified, asking if he really needs to attack the giant and questioning if the system is stupid and insane. Suddenly, the trapped Tyrannosaurus Rex notices something. The protagonist quickly hides and comments that the reward is 10 attribute points, which makes it impossible not to feel tempted. If he's fast enough, he could try. The protagonist picks up a rock and throws it at the giant, hitting it. However, the Tyrannosaurus Rex notices and starts growling at him. The king quickly hides and comments that this is so exciting. Suddenly, a system window appears, saying he successfully attacked the giant and completed Part 2 of the sequence mission, Giant. Attribute points, +10. The system asks him to distribute the points, automatically accepting the mission, Giant Part 3. The protagonist is surprised to see there's another part. Sequence mission, Part 3, kill an adult giant alone. Reward, attribute points ×100. Time limit, none. He is tempted by the 100 attribute points, thinking this could change everything and wondering if he should try. The Tyrannosaurus Rex growls at him. Suddenly, the giant slaps the ground, creating a huge impact and covering the protagonist in snow. As he dusts himself off, he thinks that this brought him back to reality, and that, even if it were 10,000 points, it wouldn't be worth it, because his life is too precious. Later that day, a group of sentinels arrives at the camp and notifies the queen of their arrival. Xiao asks if they made any discoveries during the night patrol. One of the sentinels apologizes, saying they found nothing. The queen instructs them to expand the patrol area and continue the search. The sentinel understands. Suddenly, Yin approaches and comments that they should prepare for the worst, just in case. The queen tells her to stay quiet, saying he stayed behind and risked his life to save them, and she doesn't want to hear such things from her. Suddenly, one of the fishmen shouts, saying the king has returned. Hwan is helping him walk as the people, concerned, ask if he is all right, and thank the gods for his return. The muscular one questions Hwang about why he didn't light the beacon, as that would have brought the king back sooner. He replies that the king said not to light it, to avoid causing a commotion. The queen shouts for them to stop crowding around and let the king rest. The people are surprised by the queen's presence and shout that her majesty is there. Xiao tells them to return to their posts, as she will take care of the king. The people understand. With an intimidating gaze, the queen says that if she finds out anyone leaked this information, there will be severe consequences. Later, in the palace, Tarzan is on guard outside and hears someone say they're happy about Agun and the others' return. Meanwhile, lying in bed, the protagonist continues to say he didn't expect them to bring the hyena cubs along. He sits up and suggests giving the cubs to Shun to care for, so he'll have extra help when he goes out alone in the future. The queen, with her foot on his shoulder, tells him to worry about himself first, saying that no matter how capable he is, he should remain calm. The protagonist says his injuries aren't serious. He's just exhausted and will be fine after a good night's sleep, so he should handle the tribe's affairs first. The queen understands and says she'll notify Shun. Pushing him with her foot, she comments that he's the king of the tribe, but shouldn't do everything alone, as she doesn't want to lose her man so soon. Trembling, the protagonist tells her to watch where she steps. She tells him to rest a bit. He feels terrified, and after she leaves, comments that she's getting more and more bossy. The queen leaves the palace with her head down. Tarzan notices and asks if the king is all right. She responds that he is, but needs to rest, so Tarzan shouldn't let anyone disturb him. Tarzan understands. The protagonist decides to check the system. Physique +1, Strength +4, Intelligence +1, Agility +1, Prestige 0, Technology 62, Territory Novice Tribe 1,300 square kilometers, population 68, civilization rank, Stone Age level 0. He remarks that even though he lost 4 attribute points, he gained 10 new ones, so the journey was worth it. However, having more strength and little agility isn't helpful in critical moments. High agility is more important for survival. He sighs and decides to increase agility first. The system notifies him that the agility attribute has increased to 5, reaching a limit. To increase it further, it will cost double the attribute points. He's surprised to see there's a limit and wonders if spending double attribute points to raise agility to 10 would reach another limit. He questions if double would turn to quadruple and quadruple to octuple. He's shaken and comments that getting 22 points in agility won't be easy. Last time, he increased his strength to 6 without hitting a limit. He guesses the limit varies for each attribute, and, to maximize benefits, he should raise attributes to their limits first. The system notifies that the strength attribute has reached 10, body enhancement in progress. Suddenly, a mysterious energy starts emanating from his body. The protagonist yells, saying it's even more intense than last time and feels like his body is going to explode. Suddenly, his shoes tear. He's shocked to see even his pants rip apart. The system notifies that the strength attribute has reached a threshold. Any further increase will require double the attribute points. He remarks that the strength limit was 10, but he didn't expect it to be so intense, enough to ruin his pants and shoes. Looking at the system, he says he has no more attribute points left to distribute, and there are still 2 attributes to reach their limits. He wonders what effect the intelligence attribute would have on him. The system notifies that the higher the intelligence, the greater the chances of high-reward random tasks appearing. Exhausted, the protagonist lies down on the bed, commenting that attribute points are currently rare resources, and putting them into intelligence for increased reward chances would be a big waste. Looking at his hand, his eyes slowly start to close as he thinks he should use future attribute points to reach the physique threshold first, and that he needs to make more clothes for himself. But for now, he'll sleep. The next day at the camp, the fishermen were fishing, and Sho was teaching a woman how to skin. She explains she needs to ensure the edges are intact when cutting the hide. Around a campfire, one of the fishermen is frying fish and tells everyone to come eat as it's ready. Elsewhere, the queen is training a group of throwers. Instructing them, she asks them to prepare and throw, and they all hit their targets. A woman approaches and reports 6 hits, 1 grazed and 1 missed. The protagonist says that considering they just started training, that's not bad at all. Smiling, he says that this was expected from his queen. She gets flustered, lightly punches him in the chest, and asks what he's doing there, questioning if she didn't tell him to rest and if he's looking to get beaten up. He replies that he rested and just wanted to see what everyone was doing. The queen notices something and asks if those are new pants, teasing him about who he's been playing around with instead of resting, asking if it was with Yu. Grabbing the protagonist's tool, he panics, questioning what she's talking about and asking her to calm down. He asks her to let go first and explains that it was just a power boost that made him grow, and his clothes no longer fit. The queen, suspicious, says that this time she'll believe him. She also mentions that the team of throwers was already formed, though it would take some time before they were ready for combat, and the patrol and sentinels could be entrusted to Windy, who was a specialist in this. The protagonist asks how Gun and Yin are doing and if they've recovered from their injuries. The queen says that Gun wouldn't stay still. He said he couldn't be a burden to the tribe and went this morning to guard the southern mountains beacon. She asked Lady Yu to bring him food and water, so there's no need to worry about him. The queen continues, saying she's more concerned about Yin, who had lighter injuries but might be in a bad mood because she reprimanded her earlier. The protagonist says that Yin cares deeply for the queen and tries to bear everything silently for her, suggesting the queen treat her better from now on. The protagonist mentions he'll go back now and continue recovering, and in a few days, he'll need to head north to gather those precious grain plants. Outside the palace, he comments that he'll use these days to keep inventing. Gun, on the southern mountain, was meditating. 4 days later in the palace, the protagonist sighs and, holding a plaque, comments that this should be enough. With numbered plaques from 1 to 9, he decides to teach the tribe simple addition and subtraction, so he won't have to do all the calculations himself. Suddenly, a system window appears, saying he created a written language, technology points, plus 10. He created numbers, technology points, plus 10. He's surprised to see he earned 20 technology points at once. The system alerts him that his technology points have reached 100, unlocking the technology shop. He wonders what this shop is and what it's for. The technology shop allows him to exchange technology points for various useful tools and heritage plaques. The protagonist is thrilled. Once exchanged, items cannot be returned. Nitro. 5 technology points, 10 grams. Hemostatic solution, 10 technology points, 1 unit. Hematite, 20 technology points, 1 kilogram. Large iron pot, 30 technology points, 1 unit. Spice set, 50 technology points, 1 set. Unidentified heritage plaque, 100 technology points, 1 unit. Level 1 heritage plaque, mathematics, 100 technology points, limited to 1 unit. Level 1 heritage plaque, agriculture, 100 technology points, limited to 1 unit. Furnace set, 500 technology points, limited to 1 set. Level 2 heritage plaque, shipbuilding, 500 technology points, limited to 1 unit. And a mysterious unknown item. The protagonist can't believe he can exchange for resources and comments that this is amazing. Holding the system window, he decides to take a closer look at the items. Then he decides and says he'll exchange for this first. The system notifies him that he has successfully exchanged for a large iron pot. Now his technology points are at 70. The protagonist thinks the item is great, and emphasizes that some might think he wasted points to get a pot. However, what they don't understand is that he didn't exchange it just for cooking and boiling soup, but because it's the only tool available at the moment. Moreover, if he ties it to his back, it can serve as armor, and strapped to his arm, it becomes a large shield. In a critical moment, it can even unleash a skill. Tarzan enters the house at that moment and sees the protagonist daydreaming with the pot. He says he heard a noise and came in to check it out. Embarrassed, the protagonist claims he was communicating with other deities through brainwaves, adding that Tarzan wouldn't understand. Shortly after, the protagonist dug a hole, lit a fire underneath using firewood, and with that, created a simple earthen stove to boil water. The system notifies that he successfully built a stove. Technology points, plus 10. Current technology points, 80. Standing in front of a stove, the protagonist can't believe he received 10 technology points for the earthen stove, and comments that he learned so much back then trying to impress a teacher, and he didn't expect it to be useful. Watching the water boil in the iron pot, he says it's time to start cooking. Adding fish and other seafood, he remarks that now they can have fish soup and begin stirring. The system notifies that he used water to cook food and invented a new cooking technique. Technology points, plus 10. Current technology points, 90. He's pleased to receive another 10 points and says today's luck is amazing. Suddenly, Annabelle approaches and tells him to come see something, saying it was a success. The protagonist is confused, wondering what he's talking about. Approaching, he sees what Annabelle is holding. A system window notifies that he successfully obtained sea salt. Technology points, plus 10. Current technology points, 100. The protagonist comments that this is fantastic and that he arrived at just the right time. Adding salt to the soup, he asks Annabelle to stay and taste the fresh soup with him, commenting that he didn't expect to reach 100 points again so quickly and that this pot was practically free. He asks Tarzan to call the camp people to bring their wooden bowls and gather there. Tarzan agrees. Later at the camp, as the soup is ready, the people, after serving themselves, comment on how great it smells and how delicious it is. Ah Yu, while helping to serve, tells them not to rush, as there is still plenty left. The muscular one exclaims how good it is and asks for another bowl. Ah Yu notes that she's already eaten 2 bowls and if she keeps going, there won't be enough for others. The king says it's no problem since he'll cook more later, especially for those on patrol and those stationed at the beach, who will also get their share, and he'll bring it to them in a few days. Annabelle thanks him, saying he's amazing. The protagonist thinks he'll need to find time to teach them to use chopsticks so they can enjoy a meat stew in the future. He decides to open the technology shop. Nitro, 5 technology points, 10 grams. Hemostatic solution, 10 technology points, 1 unit. Hematite, 20 technology points, 1 kilogram. Large iron pot, 30 technology points, 1 unit. Spice set, 50 technology points, 1 set. Unidentified heritage plaque, 100 technology points, 1 unit. Level 1 heritage plaque. Mathematics, 100 technology points, limited to 1. Level 1 heritage plaque. Agriculture, 100 technology points, limited to 1. Temporarily unavailable, view only. Furnace set, 500 technology points, limited to 1. Level 2 heritage plaque. Shipbuilding, 500 technology points, limited to 1. He wonders if he should exchange his 100 technology points for something, but he can teach basic mathematics and agriculture knowledge himself, so there's no need to spend points on those. Thinking about agriculture, he recalls the precious seeds when suddenly one of the sentinels arrives, calling for him urgently. Approaching, she reports that a trap in the north was triggered, but shows no signs of human activity nearby, and the captured prey seems to be alive. She asks what they should do. The queen steps in and says there's no need to trouble the king with such matters, instructing the sentinel to kill it and bring it here. The sentinel confirms. The queen comments that he shouldn't do everything and questions how long it's been since he spent some time with her. The protagonist understands and says he wants to spend time with her too, but they need to develop their home first, and he'll bring new gains and changes from this journey. She understands, and they kiss. The sentinel is shocked to see this, and the king asks her to take him to the trap. As he follows, he wonders if the prey being alive might trigger a new domestication mission, and mentions that the house's construction is in the queen's hands. Xiao lovingly agrees and asks him to come back soon. He remarks that the Rami Agun and the others brought last time is finished, so they need more anyway. He thinks the most important thing is to bring back those precious corn plants. Sometime later, the protagonist and a small group head toward the triggered trap. The sentinel notes that they're almost there and, upon approaching, asks the king to take a look. Peering into the pit, he's puzzled, wondering what's going on. Everyone gathers around the pit to see. The sentinel comments that the hyena had been howling desperately until a short while ago, and looking at it in the pit, says it seems to have lost its strength and has even stopped crying. Shitu is confused to see the hyena again, and wonders if they've been watching them. The little one observes that it seems similar to the boar mother from before and looks like it's nursing. The protagonist asks how he knows that. The little one says he's very sensitive to milk. Seeing the sentinel's discomfort, he clarifies that he meant he's sensitive to the smell of milk. The protagonist, thinking, wonders if the hyena is nursing and if she might be the mother of the cubs they captured. He asks them to try to bring her out, but if the situation gets dangerous, they can leave her there. They understand. After a while, Annabelle and Shitu manage to pull the hyena out of the pit with a rope. Annabelle comments that she was barely alive and didn't seem to be a threat to them. The protagonist asks the young one to take her back and give her something to eat to see if they can save her. The young one, confused, asks if they don't already have cubs to raise. The protagonist asks how the cubs are doing and if they are managing well. The young one replies that they don't seem to like the meat he's been giving them and are getting weaker, so he's trying to figure out what to feed them. The protagonist remarks that, as he thought, raising cubs isn't so simple, and they almost let those little ones die. He says that when they get back, they should make sure to tie her up, feed her meat, and then let her nurse the cubs. He asks the young one to take her back first and handle that. The young one understands and assures him to leave it to him. Watching him leave, the protagonist hopes that the hyena won't become a problematic guest at home and won't cause any serious trouble. He tells Windy to take someone and reset the trap, while the rest will follow him north. She nods. Later, in the north, the protagonist is gathering the precious plant and comments that, thankfully, they arrived on time, as a few more days would have been too late. He thinks that they seem to have some time left, so they should also gather some medicinal herbs before returning. After nightfall, they are walking back toward camp when they suddenly notice something. Ahead, they hear a wild beast growling. The protagonist says it's the bear again and shouts that it's the man-eating bear, and they should hide in the bushes. He's impressed with how quickly they hid and asks if they're the Flash. The beast keeps growling, and hidden in the bushes they feel tense. Hwan asks if they should drop all their gear. The protagonist says no, that they'll wait until the beast leaves and then continue. He then questions why Hwang is sticking his butt out. Hwang replies that the king doesn't understand. This position allows them to jump away if they encounter danger, essential for survival. The protagonist feels embarrassed. Hwang asks if he thinks it's the same bear that chased them last time. The protagonist comments that they'll find out as soon as it appears. Hwang asks if the man-eating bear likes to eat Rami. The king comments that he doesn't think so. Hwang says he has another question. Annoyed, the protagonist yells at him to be quiet, or they'll attract the bear, and if that happens, he'll throw him to the bear first. Hwang retorts that the king just shouted so loudly, and if the bear comes, it'll be because of him. Annabelle warns that it's coming. The enraged bear appears among the trees but begins to stagger and falls to the ground. Someone wonders if it's injured. Hwang says this is a great opportunity and asks if they should take down another prey. Suddenly they hear someone shouting that the bear is just ahead and not to let it escape. The desperate bear gets up and starts to flee. The protagonist tells everyone to be cautious because there's someone hunting the bear. He then notices a group of hunters chasing it. Hwang asks what the Jui Clan is doing there. The protagonist quickly realizes that the fishmen are charging forward upon realizing it's the Jui Clan. Shitu shouts that it's time for revenge, blood for blood. The protagonist is concerned about Shitu, and seeing him about to jump toward the hunters, he grabs him by the arm. However, one of the Jui Clan members, hiding behind a tree, notices something in the bushes as the hunters shout to throw their spears. Shitu, hidden in the bushes, comments that he won't let this opportunity slip away. The protagonist tells him not to be foolish and asks him not to let himself be consumed by revenge. Watching them, The king continues, saying that the Jui clan outnumbers them, and if they attack without a plan, everyone will die. The only thing they can do is hide and avoid being discovered. He says he understands the desire to fight, but in the art of war, even the right moment must be waited for, and they should continue hiding. The bear, desperate, tries to escape but falls to the ground. One of the hunters comments that the beast won't be able to escape them and laughs, saying they should have seen its face while it was running. Suddenly, someone places a hand on his head. The leader, with an intimidating look, says they captured the animal, but that deer meat mixed with white flowers only managed to injure its abdomen, preventing it from escaping. He emphasizes that, for fighting for its life, the bear doesn't deserve to be mocked. Then he throws the hunter against a tree and asks if he wants to mock that. The hunter, hitting the tree, starts coughing up blood. Approaching the bear, the leader, holding a mysterious weapon, tells everyone to step aside because they're only getting in the way. The protagonist, seeing that weapon, receives a system notification that says, "This blade is made of obsidian." Obsidian is a type of igneous rock composed of aluminosilicates. He thinks that the deer meat mixed with white flowers was indeed a formidable trap, and that the Jui clan knows how to use poison. The system alerts that a new side mission has been unlocked. Rescue. Objective: rescue the man-eating bear. Rewards: attribute points ×2, trust of the Bearland tribe. It asks if he accepts. The protagonist is surprised by the new mission and comments that the system is saying they have to face the Jui clan. He questions, noting that they are outnumbered, and on top of that, he has to rescue a man-eating bear that almost killed him before. He asks if the system is crazy. The system responds that the mission is very rare and generally doesn't unlock so easily, suggesting he accept it and stop complaining. He's surprised to see it's a rare mission and mutters that he's in trouble since time is running out. The leader, with his blade, is about to finish off the bear when, suddenly, the protagonist, using his agility, charges at the leader and asks the system to summon his axe, blocking the blade's strike. After defending the bear, the Jui clan members question who he is and ask if they're trying to steal their prey. The protagonist thinks that, once again, he's putting his trust in the system and hopes it's worth it to save a bear, and not die trying. The system notifies that he has started the side mission, rescue. The man-eating bear has been poisoned by a white flower and is injured. He needs to stop the bleeding and eliminate the poison within 10 minutes. Otherwise, he will fail this very rare mission. The protagonist, seeing the bear's condition, comments that he almost forgot about the poison in it, and thinking it over, realizes his goal is to save the man-eating bear, so it's best not to confront the Jui clan. However, with only 10 minutes left to complete the mission, he has no time to negotiate with them. One of the Jui clan men questions how this group of strangers dares to try to steal their prey, commenting they must be very brave. The Jui leader recognizes someone among them, calls out Shitu, and asks if he's from the clan that lives by the sea, apologizing as he doesn't remember the useless ones. Frustrated, Shitu asks the king when they will attack. Suddenly, the system notifies that if he fails the mission, the penalty will be that Chen Li Jr. will shrink. The protagonist is shocked, imagining the queen mocking him, saying she expected him to grow enough to be worthy of her. He becomes furious, shouting anything, even cursing the system. Everyone is confused by the king's reaction. One of the members of the Jui clan questions what's wrong with this strange person. The protagonist approaches Shitu and comments that more people were coming from behind, so they should be careful. He states that he'll give only one order: dying is forbidden. Thus, an intense battle ensues. The protagonist applies hemostatic ointment to the bear's wounds and remarks that the injury was neither deep nor fatal. The system notifies the remaining time, 9 minutes and 11 seconds. The protagonist says that now he just needed to detoxify it. He becomes desperate, not knowing how to do so. Suddenly, a member of the Jui clan falls unconscious beside him. Looking at the battlefield, he thinks his people were doing quite well, but he needed to hurry, as everyone seemed exhausted, and he hoped no one would die. The leader of the Jui clan decides to join the fight, saying it was enough already, as he saw they knew how to fight, but hadn't faced him yet. For a group of vagrants, they fought quite well, and if they left now, he'd let them live another day. Shitu tells him to stop talking nonsense, as they had scores to settle. Hwan, wielding his axe, shouts that it was just a warm-up, but it seemed like they had scared them into wanting to give up. Hwang's brother comments that his siblings still had plenty of energy to continue, and if it were nighttime, it would be even better. Annabelle tells the king not to worry, as they had everything under control. The system notifies the remaining time, 6 minutes and 21 seconds. The protagonist thinks he's running out of time but is doing everything right, though he had no idea how he would detoxify the bear. Annabelle and the others were still fighting but were starting to get tired. If they continued at this pace, not only would he fail the mission, but he'd also lose them. He could already see the system's cruelty. Suddenly, the leader of the Jui clan stomps the ground, creating an impact toward Annabelle and the others, who shout to be careful. The leader is confused when the protagonist steps in and defends against the attack. The king thinks he was destined to create a great commotion. The leader asks him to state his name. The protagonist asks what he meant by name, and questions if that's what they called him. The leader clarifies that he was asking for his name and the clan's name, as he initially thought they were just vagrants, but he was mistaken. Pointing his blade, he introduces himself as Jushi, lord of the Jui clan, and asks about the protagonist. The protagonist replies that he's from the novice tribe, and his name is King Chen. Jushi states that intimidating a smaller group wasn't his style, and hopes they'll gather more people for the next day, as that's how he preferred to fight. He orders his clan to pick up the wounded as it was time to leave. The man he had thrown continued vomiting. Jushi passes by him and tells him to get up as they were leaving. The man complies. The protagonist and his group watch as they retreat. Annabelle comments that it seems they'll live to see another day. The king, looking at the bear, mentions he still had matters to resolve. The system notifies the remaining time, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Later that night, Jushi and his group are returning when a man asks if they were just going back like that, and if it was the others' lucky day since they let them live. Jushi comments that, in this hunt, they used the small white flower and not the divine herb. Looking at his hand, a mysterious energy emanates from it. He continues, saying that the power the witch granted was about to disappear completely, and that boy was not a mere human, as he was able to effectively block 70% of his strength. He couldn't believe that was the boy's only ability, and suspected he was hiding many things. Holding his blade, Jushi remarks that the boy's weapon was nothing ordinary, and wonders where he came from. The next time they faced each other, he swore he would not underestimate them. The protagonist and his group were trying to save the man-eating bear, and he remarks that the bear was poisoned by a white flower known as datura metal. He asks if anyone knew how to detoxify it. Everyone feels dejected, shaking their heads, admitting they didn't know. The king comments that he saw nothing wrong with this. Hwan questions why he was trying to detoxify it, since it was the beast that nearly killed him before. The protagonist replies that he couldn't waste time explaining. The only thing they needed to know was that he had to save the bear. Desperate, he shouts that it was a matter of life and death, the greatest crisis in history. Hwang understands. The protagonist mentions that these two herbs had detoxifying properties, but he wasn't sure if they would be able to neutralize the datura metal poison. The system informs him of the herbs, Japanese honeysuckle and Agrimonia pilosa. The king says that now they had to pray they could save the bear and asks for help to open the bear's jaws while he shoved in the two herbs. However, upon opening its mouth, they start to smell a strong, fishy odor. The system notifies that time was running out. 0 minutes and 1 second remaining. The toxin was eliminated from the man-eating bear, so it was no longer in danger. The protagonist feels relieved, saying his soul returned to his body. Annabelle asks if the bear was safe, and the protagonist replies that, for now, yes. She too, indignant, says that the Jui clan members couldn't have gone far, and they could catch up to them and have their revenge. He asks who's with him. The king comments that he didn't know how many people were in their clan, and that if they acted rashly, they would suffer deadly consequences. Even if they won, they wouldn't be too happy to celebrate since they might lose many warriors, something he wouldn't allow under any circumstances. However, he imagines that the Jui clan would try to invade them and that they needed to create a defensive plan and get back to work. Huang's brother asks him what the king meant, and Huang replies that it was better not to ask. The protagonist tells them to return with the herbs first, as he would light a fire and watch over the bear during the night. They agree. The king asks Annabelle, once he arrives, to inform the queen to prepare the patrols and guards, for guests would soon be arriving. Sometime later, under the firelight, the protagonist was protecting the bear. Suddenly, he hears something, and from the bushes, a pack of wild beasts emerges. He remarks that he knew they would show up, opportunists wanting a piece of his friend, and holding his axe, says that dinner was served. At dawn, one of the wild beasts was completely burned. The protagonist comments that thing was awful, but after roasting one of the wild beasts, holding a piece of meat, he says at least it was quite delicious. Suddenly, the bear wakes up, and the protagonist notices it staring at him. He remarks that it would be better if the bear thought carefully about what it would do next, as he wasn't in the mood to hurt it. And if it didn't like roasted meat, it could grab one of the fresh prey he left for it and eat whatever it wanted. After devouring everything, the two were full, and a system window appears saying, "The man-eating bear is out of danger. The rescue mission was a success." He earned 2 attribute points and gained the trust of the bear tribe. He had to choose which attribute to enhance: physique +1, strength +10, intelligence +1, agility +5. He remarks that he would stick to his usual plan and increase strength to its limit. Suddenly, the bear grabs one of the prey and hands it to the protagonist. He is confused and says he thought the bear was offering the prey as a token of gratitude and wonders if that's what they call the trust of the bear tribe. He insists, saying that the prey belonged to the bear since it had caught it for itself, and questions why the bear didn't offer something else instead of the prey. Imagining a beautiful woman, he comments that the bear could bring him one of those, as he swore he would accept it with great pleasure. The protagonist then says that since the bear was fine, there was nothing more to do, so he would return to the tribe. As he departs, he notices something and is confused to see that the bear was following him, sniffing around. The protagonist asks if the bear wanted to follow him. The bear seems enamored with him, but the protagonist quickly shouts for it to make an oath. The bear doesn't understand what he wants. The king explains that it should swear not to rebel against him or devour the entire tribe. The bear swears. The protagonist thinks that, although it would take a lot of meat to satisfy the hunger of a giant bear, it would be really cool to ride one. He declares that he has decided on accepting it as a companion, and from now on, we'll call it Ursa Mayer. She gets excited and starts licking him. The king, pleased, asks her to stop, as he already understands that she's happy. He starts petting her, thinking that now they had a heavy hitter on their side. After mounting her, he continues pondering that it would be better to explore the path they had taken earlier before returning. As they walk through the forest, he notices 2 sets of footprints becoming increasingly deeper, indicating that the ground they were heading toward was gradually getting softer. However, he notices something ahead and wonders if it's a bamboo grove. He says that these bamboos could be used as construction material, but also to make a bomb. He would only need to mix niter, sulfur, and charcoal in the ratio of 75, 15, and 10%, then put it inside a bamboo shoot. If he could really make this bomb, it might have an unexpected effect in the decisive battle. Even if the power wasn't enough, the explosion's noise would sound like a celestial thunderclap to their ears. He thinks they already found niter, and charcoal is easy to find and can be made in a furnace. As he walks through the bamboo forest, he continues thinking that the only thing left was to find sulfur, which can only be found near volcanoes. Following his intuition, he believes he can reach such a place and asks the system to open the map. He starts looking for a volcano on the map and discovers that the volcano was located where the giant was sleeping and was closer to his current location. If that big guy wasn't around, he could take a risk and have a look. Last time, the plan was to escape, and he didn't have time to carefully search for resources nearby. He tells Ursa to avoid that direction because they would explore to the north, and that he would take her to see someone much larger than her, warning her not to pee herself in fear. Sometime later, near the snow-capped mountain, Ursa is running very fast to impress the protagonist. Upon reaching the snowy area, Ursa starts trembling. The protagonist tells her to take it easy, and remarks that this must be the side that Little and Shitu mentioned. When he was there before, he wasn't very inclined to pay attention to the surroundings, but this time, he would take the opportunity to have a good look around. As they approach a lake, he asks Ursa Mayer to walk instead of running, so she could catch her breath. She slowly walks to the shore, and he tells her to be careful, as there were no bushes along the shore, and he believes the sea monster they talked about wouldn't be easy to spot. Suddenly, Ursa Mayer senses a presence and starts growling. He asks if she found something, when suddenly a shadow begins to form in the lake, and a massive monster emerges from the water. The two are on high alert. The monster starts roaring, and they realize it's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. He tells Ursa Mayer to crouch down, but then he notices something and wonders if that was a collar around the T-Rex's neck. Could it be a pet that took the chance to escape while the giant was sleeping? Surely the monster that scared the saber-tooth tiger was this T-Rex, and those enormous footprints he saw earlier were left by it. If that's the case, the giant he saw on the mountain has been sleeping for at least half a month. He tells Ursa to silently turn around and not let the T-Rex notice them. They manage to escape through the tall grass, and after distancing themselves from the danger, they continue walking toward the snow-covered mountain. The protagonist starts searching for something, remarking that they couldn't move too far ahead because if the snow got thicker, they wouldn't be able to escape quickly if something went wrong. Suddenly, he asks Ursa to stay still. He dismounts and begins walking behind her, telling her not to worry and that she could go ahead, as he would follow her and wouldn't abandon her. The only thing he asked was for her to stay alert to any movement around them. Suddenly, he crouches down and finds something, noticing it had a very strong smell and that there was more beneath the snow. He wonders why the smell was getting stronger. As he continues walking, the scent intensifies. and he hopes nothing bad happens. Suddenly, he begins frantically digging through the snow and exclaims that he found something, calling Ursa Mayer over, because there was a lot of sulfur. Of course, he wasn't mistaken. With this sulfur, the manufacturing process was closer than ever. One day later, the protagonist and Ursa return to the camp. Little One notices and shouts that the king is back, and everyone is amazed to see him riding a giant bear. The protagonist asks everyone to calm down and says that the bear's name is Ursa Mayer and that she would accompany him from now on. Little One is delighted and comments that it's too amazing, saying that when he grows up, he wants to be as incredible as the king. The protagonist responds that it's no problem and that he will definitely find an animal companion for Little One in the future. Little One thanks him. Seeing how excited Little One is, the king thinks he couldn't keep wasting the boy's riding skills. After unloading the bamboo from Ursa Mayer's back, he asks Yu to find a warm place to dry them, as they would be very useful in the future. The queen, impressed by the giant bear, asks if she can ride her, and the king replies that yes, she can, for she is his queen. Suddenly, someone shouts that there's a problem. One of the fishmen begins desperately calling for the king. The protagonist tells him to take a breath, and the fishman says that a huge monster appeared out of nowhere on the beach and went berserk near the coast. The waves caused destruction to the salt flats on the shore, and it was so powerful that none of them could handle it. Several people were injured. The protagonist tells him not to worry, as he would take care of it himself. A while later, the protagonist, riding Ursa, rushes to the location. When they arrive at the beach, they find it completely destroyed. Suddenly he notices something, and finally spots the monster, wondering what the hell that thing was. He asks the system to scan the sea monster. A system window appears saying, Ichthyosaurus, a large carnivorous marine reptile resembling a giant fish, fierce and viviparous. At this moment, this monster is still in its developmental stage, approximately 7 meters in length, capable of reaching over 10 meters when fully grown. The protagonist is surprised and comments that this monster couldn't be ignored, otherwise it would become a problem in the future. He decides to try to lure it to the shore, where he could attack it, and asks if Ursa Mayer understood what he said. Both charge at the monster. Ursa leaps, and the protagonist, wielding his axe, prepares to strike. Suddenly, the monster attacks first, striking Ursa with its tail. However, the protagonist manages to land a blow with his axe. The monster cries out in pain but quickly turns to attack the protagonist from behind, attempting to swallow him whole. The protagonist struggles to resist, but the monster takes advantage and dives. The protagonist is shocked to realize that the monster was dragging him to the depths of the sea. He thinks that if this continues, even if the monster doesn't kill him with its bite, he will end up drowning. Suddenly, the monster stops, confused by what's happening. Ursa Mayer has grabbed the monster's tail and, enraged, begins to pull it with all her strength. The protagonist thinks that Ursa was following the plan to the letter, and that he couldn't give up no matter how exhausted he was. At that moment, a mysterious woman wielding a sword approaches. Without him noticing, the mysterious woman slashes the monster, defeating it. However, the protagonist begins to drown, and as he loses consciousness, he thinks this was the first time he had ever seen such a monster. The mysterious woman swims toward him to save him. Sometime later, he begins to open his eyes. The fishmen shout that the king is awake and alive. One of them calls for the mysterious woman, saying that the king wanted to meet her. She approaches and sits next to the king. The fishman explains that this girl's name was Alan. She was the best swimmer in the entire Yellen Clan, and it was she who killed the sea monster moments ago, saving the king from a miserable death. While the girl picks her nose, the fishman continues, saying that none of the clan members were very smart, and that's why the girl also lacked a bit of intelligence. The protagonist tells him not to worry because she was his savior, and it was impossible for him to be upset with her over such a small detail. He asks who gave her the obsidian dagger. She replies that her brother stole it from the bad guys. He asks who those bad guys were, and if she meant that the dagger belonged to the Jui Clan. She tells the fishman that she wants to know the name of this annoying man because he keeps asking questions non-stop, and she wonders if she can't just silence him with a punch. The fishman leans in and whispers something to her, to which she responds that she understands, asking if the king was there to help them. The protagonist confirms. She then explains that a group of bad men invaded their territory that day, attacking swiftly and putting everyone to sleep. When she woke up, she was inside a cave with her brother, Hyuga, and other clan members. One day, while they were being exploited, her brother whispered to her that he would get rid of one of the bad guys and give her his weapon. She then used the weapon to defend herself and jumped off a cliff without thinking, as there was a rushing river below. She was the only one who managed to escape alive. She seems hesitant, but he reassures her, asking her to listen. Surrounded by members of the Jui clan, Hyuga explains that after she escapes, she should run back to the clan and find Shitu, as he always had good luck and was probably still alive. Once she finds him, she should do whatever he asks. She agrees. Suddenly, one of the Jui clan members yells, calling out to the two and asking why they were taking so long to bring the bear. As Hyuga approaches, he says the bear is right there and strikes the man with it. He shouts for her to grab the dagger and leave immediately. And that's how she arrived just in time to see the king in trouble with the monster, saving him. The protagonist comments that it was fortunate she came and suggests she return with him to the camp, where he would take her to Shitu. He remembers that he nearly forgot to retrieve the axe and the monster to take them back to the camp. Sometime later, they are returning while Ursa Mayer carries the monster. Upon arrival, the protagonist asks where Shitu and Annabelle are. They are surprised to see the king there. Annabelle is happy, and Shitu is shocked to see the girl, asking how he found her so quickly. The protagonist says it's a long story. After a while, Shitu asks if, aside from her brother, there were more than a dozen clan members alive. He becomes desperate and tells the king that they must rescue them. The protagonist agrees, saying that saving those people is important, but then suddenly shouts as he notices something. Smoke was coming from the tower on that mountain, and he wonders what the hell is going on. He comments that he had already told them that if they were attacked by a common beast, they shouldn't light the beacon recklessly. And when Lord Jui said that intimidating a small group wasn't his style, and that he hoped to gather more people for the next day, those words could be interpreted as a desire for revenge. He doesn't believe that someone from the Jui clan came to invade, and he needs to check it out immediately to see with his own eyes what's happening. He instructs Annabelle to take care of the fort on the beach and reinforce the defenses by assigning positions to prevent any enemy from entering or leaving the territory. Annabelle assures him not to worry. The protagonist orders them to take the girl and head straight to the river to prepare an ambush, and that the patrol team would join them. They shouldn't act rashly until he arrived and should wait near the ambush area. He asks if everyone understood, then starts running. Shitu says he understands and that this time he won't be impulsive. Using his super speed, the protagonist runs, hoping nothing has gone wrong. When he arrives at the camp, he's surprised to see the queen. She's happy that he returned and comments how glad she is that he survived the sea monster. He responds that the monster had already turned into sushi meat for the rest of the week and that Ursa Mayer was bringing it back. The queen tells him to rest, adding that later she would send someone to check on him. The king apologizes, saying he can't rest because he needs to handle something before Shitu loses control, making it impossible for anyone to stop him. He asks Hwan, Lung, Little One, and Yin to come with him, while the rest and Ursa Mayer would return later to take care of the tribe. He instructs Little One to find a high place to watch the surroundings in all directions, and to send signals if he sees anything suspicious. The muscular woman approaches, saying she also wants to join since the king didn't take her along the last few times, and this time she insists on being present. The protagonist agrees, telling her to follow orders at all times. She's delighted. The king tells Tarzan to stay behind and protect the queen, and he nods in understanding. A while later, the protagonist and his group are hidden in the bushes, while a group of fishmen are in the water. Little One and Yin are up in the trees. Hwang remarks that they're coming. Jui and his men are there. He notices something and asks his warriors to wait, saying he knew they were there and that they should come out for a good fight. The protagonist wonders if Jui managed to discover their trap. Jui continues, saying they couldn't fool him because it was too quiet around. He could hear the birds and even feel the movements of insects and frogs. If they didn't come out of their hiding holes, he would make them taste the divine power of the purple celestial herb. But honestly, he didn't want to use it that way. The protagonist observes, thinking that there seemed to be no other choice but to face them head on, so he and his group reveal themselves. Shitu and the other fishmen do the same, surrounding him. Jui comments that this is excellent, an even number of people, so now everyone can pick their opponent and start fighting. Pointing his blade, he declares that the king will fight him. Shitu, indignant, curses him and charges forward, saying that Jui would have to get past him first. Suddenly, one of Jui's men intercepts him, and the two begin to clash, pushing against each other and shouting. Jui remarks that it seems someone is even more eager than he is and orders Muchi to play with him. Suddenly, Muchi grabs Shitu by the leg and hurls him, smashing him against a rock. The protagonist shouts for Shitu in surprise, wondering how, despite Shitu's incredible strength, he was thrown so easily. Yin takes the opportunity to cut a rope, triggering the trap, and a massive tree trunk swings toward a large man, striking him directly. However, the man easily catches the trunk, suffering little to no damage. The protagonist can't believe what he's seeing and realizes that the man was so resilient that he didn't even feel pain. It was clear they were about to face a fierce battle. Shitu starts coughing and wipes the blood from his mouth. Muchi charges at him, yelling that he's going to end this quickly, calling him trash, and tries to land a punch, but Shitu manages to dodge. Muchi is surprised, but Shitu tackles him with his shoulder and starts pushing him, shouting that he's going to drag him to the river to see if he's still laughing then. Muchi yells that he won't allow it and starts pushing back, causing a massive impact. Suddenly, Alan appears behind the large man and, with her blade, tries to strike him, but a brute hurls a small man like a ball in her direction. She's shocked to see this, and the small man says, "Not so fast," tossing her straight into the water. Alan glares seriously as the small man dives toward her, intending to attack. The protagonist is worried about her. One of the men behind Lord Jushi asks if he hadn't said they came here for fun, questioning why Muchi and Shui got to play first. The twin brother, pointing at the king, says they would play with that one standing still. The other man argues that he was chosen first by Lord Jushi. The other dismisses this, telling his brother to forget it, that he was doing the Lord a favor, and charges toward the protagonist. Thus, the two rush at him, shouting that the Lord wouldn't dirty his hands. Hwan and his brother intercept them, challenging whether they intended to fight the king, stating they'd have to go through their corpses first. Hwang strikes one with his shield from behind, and Lang manages to disarm the other man using a torch. One of the men comments that it was close, and that they were going to have fun. His twin says that it was indeed fun. The man warns that it would be better if he didn't get killed. The other says he will fight the one who pushed him, while the twin declares he will take on the one with swollen lips, saying he can't wait to crush him. The brute watches, approaches a massive tree trunk, easily lifts it onto his shoulders, and remarks that it's a great weapon. He moves toward Jushi, who, surprised, tells him he can play with whoever he wants, but for heaven's sake, not to bother him. The brute nods and says he's going to help Muchi. The protagonist thinks that Shitu doesn't have the strength to handle two enemies at once and rushes in, believing he must help him. However, Jushi appears in front of him, swinging his blade to strike, but the protagonist manages to dodge. He feels tense. Jushi declares that he's his opponent and asks if the protagonist intended to ignore him. He shouts that it only makes him want to kill him sooner, and enraged, charges forward with his blade, unleashing a series of strikes. However, the protagonist, using his axe, manages to block them. Jushi urges him not to hold back, saying he wants to see his true abilities. The king, while defending himself, thinks the situation is getting dire, and yells for someone to assist Shitu. The brute is dragging the enormous tree trunk when he suddenly notices something, questioning why it suddenly feels heavier. The muscular woman is holding the trunk and asks him where he thinks he's going, saying they'll see who's stronger since he still has to face her. The brute asks if she wants to play with Shangui, saying that's very generous of her, and tries to strike her with his hand. But just as he's about to hit her, an arrow pierces him. He's confused to see that it actually hurt him, and suddenly, another arrow comes his way. He blocks it with his arm and comments that this is great because there are even more people wanting to play with him, and it's fantastic to know that Lord Jushi wasn't lying to him. Finally, he has someone to play with, and this time he'll play with two at once. Yushi tells him to hurry up and play with them, for when they return to the clan he won't have anyone to play with and will be left alone. Yin is apprehensive about the situation. Little One comments that the king and the others are in a tough battle and that they need to help them. She replies that the giant log traps she activated earlier were meant to deal with man-eating bears, yet that brute didn't even flinch after being struck directly. She thinks he didn't even feel it, and even if they tried, they wouldn't be much help. She says she'll keep shooting arrows to distract the brute, and Little One should take advantage of this distraction to run straight to the queen and request reinforcements. Little One understands and asks her to be very careful.
If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and like the video. Thank you.